let's go ahead and get started. Clear up a few things while we're still getting stuff set up. Hopefully you guys are doing alright today. And I'll updates, let people know that we're going live. As well. Oh, Get it done. Get it going. It's done. Put that down. That link, huh? Probably. Let's do that. Alright, I think we're good on that front. So I think we'll go ahead and move into the meat and potatoes section. What we're going to talk about. So first thing, we're going to start off with our talk about what happened. I didn't stream, took a day off, so 2 sessions ago, and then the last session. So I think that's a good place to start with our Friday night game, and then we'll talk a little bit about our Sunday game, which is not a game that I usually talk about, because usually I'm streaming right in between them. But we'll talk about that as well. So let's hop over and let's take a look. Let me pull this up. Get up, guys. Oh, there we go. All right. So, this is the stuff. We can talk about this real quick. So I do sort of a timer system, that kind of a dice rolling. It's basically the resource die mechanic, which I've used multiple times. It's in other RPGs. If you're not familiar with it, you have a die roll. If you roll a 1 on the die shrinks in size to its next step, and then it goes down to 1, and then it goes down to 0. It's very simple. It's a nice sort of timer aspect to abstract things like rations or ammunition or materials of whatever types, but it's also useful, and how I'm using it here is specifically using it for timed events. So learning about things that have happened sort of outside the direct control of the player characters in the campaign. And basically stretching out, timing out how things from each PC's personal backstory happens. They learn about them. So we have the Sturges that are coming up. By the way, if you are one of my players, you don't watch this. What are you doing? Get out of here. Don't watch this. Because we're going to talk about your campaign, and you're going to spoil a bunch of stuff for yourself. You're going to see how the sausage is made. But if you're not in my campaign, watch this. Right. It's you can see sort of how I do this prep and how I do prepare for my games and run my games. And I think that's helpful to see different dungeon masters, different game masters' ways of prepping and how they run their games, so to help you find your own path for being a game master or dungeon master. I think it's helpful. Hopefully you find it helpful. But that's what we're going to do. Yeah, so we don't usually talk about this, but I'm going to show it. So we have Severance No Flicker Lodestone, which is also on the timer. That's a pseudo magic item he has right now, that character has, that came up in this past session and will come up. They have a condition, sort of a curse, that they blink out of existence sometimes, especially when people try to interact with them, like physically touch them or attack them. So for good or for bad, sometimes they'll flicker out, and this lodestone's to help sort of like anchor them, to keep them from doing that. But it is a stopgap measure. It's a temporary thing, so it will eventually just kind of run out of juice and it won't work anymore. And in here we have their burned arm, Swain's broken leg. So we're doing a thing in the campaign where when you drop to 0 hit points, instead of doing the traditional 5e/2024 thing where you just pop back up, pop down, pop up, you do that sort of thing where you hover around 0 during combat. If you fall to 0 in this campaign, you're going to take some sort of lingering injury that's going on. It's just kind of to help mitigate some of that pop-up, pop-down behavior that happen in combat. Like, you really don't want to go down to 0 because you're going to have things that are going to last for a long time. And this has been, like, Swain's broken leg has pretty much been every session that Swain has been in, he's had to deal with that. That player had to deal with that, their character having a broken leg. Because they pretty much immediately got a broken leg by falling out of a tree from like 50 feet up. And really was very close to just like perma-dying, just falling out of a tall tree at level 1, which is very funny. So let's talk about session 7, which was not yesterday's session, but the week before's session. This we didn't stream. Let's take a look at that. Alright, session 7. So everybody in the party was there except for the Sniz, and the Sniz is going to be sort of sidelined for a moment. Their players got some other stuff that's going on, so we are not going to be seeing Sniz for a while probably. They have something that came up, sort of a work thing that's come up during the time we play, so they're kind of sitting on the sidelines. They're around we're keeping them in the party, so they're around whenever they have an opportunity to play. They can jump in and play, but otherwise they're kind of sidelined, so they're not going to have any sort of like important plot points or things like that, or any backstory stuff that's really going to come up. And we've talked about this before, but we have our folk. This is just something that I do. I have a calendar for my world, and every week they have very specific chores or duties that people, basically the peasant folk, are doing. I find it helpful to be like, what is this random farming village doing? Whenever the players ask, like, or they go looking for somebody, and I'd be like, oh, well, they're out in the fields, so you're going to need to go out in the fields. It's a me thing. You don't need to do that. I like it because it adds a little bit of grounding realism to the world. And I made the calendar, and actually, you get that whole calendar. It is on DriveThruRPG, so if you want to, I think there's a link in the description if you want to grab it. And it's pay what you want, forget it. It is the chores through the year, chores through the seasons. It's called something like that. You can go grab it if you want to take a look at it. Then we have the weather. The player who plays Sniz was the one who was pretty much interested in the weather, so we don't really need to. I haven't been doing as much with the weather. We don't really need to do that as much, but it is helpful to know. And I have a little hex flower weather map, so I just roll on it between sessions. And then usually 3 like this, so it'll start off like this. In the middle of the session, it'll get kind of like this, and towards the end of the session, it's going to be like that. And it's a real easy way to just kind of feel like there's kind of dynamic weather going on. The weather in D&D or in any sort of TTRPG is kind of what you make of it. So if you don't want to deal with weather, if there's not going to have any sort of mechanical impact, then it's just a little flavor piece, or you can make it a mechanical part of the game, but you have to do a little bit of extra work. When you're like, oh, well, it's raining, and raining confers this sort of issue. Which can be really difficult, I feel like, if you're running a game in which you want to make the weather matter, because most weather only matters in a negative way. So I think it behooves you as Dungeon Master or Game Master to set like a neutral rating that's not just really great weather, and then instead give them positives when the weather's really good. When temperature's nice and the humidity's low and there's a light breeze but not too much breeze, so it's very comfortable, and give them some bonuses to some rolls in that situation, rather than just be like it's just that's the base standard, and then basically all weather is bad weather. It's just, I think that you'll get a lot more player buy-in if you do that. What I want to say. If they feel like they're going to buy into paying attention to the weather, if there is good effects that come from weather as well, not just bad effects. But most of this was pretty simple. There were some heavy winds. They dealt with those overnight in this last session, because this didn't change. They're on the same day. We'll get there. We had some ration checks. I had to do some points of order, so right at the beginning of the session there was some stuff that we needed to take care of, which was the ration checks. They had to do their injury checks. They have disadvantage, which is actually a good thing for their injuries, because they're trying to roll ones on those dice to get rid of those injuries. From seeing a physician, the physician giving them sort of a once-over on their injuries for a couple of our players. And that, hey, it's Souls Day is the weekend day, so most people aren't working. We had some foreshadowing. We did not get through this. This has been on our docket for a little bit now. The Ferujadid Sturges, and they just haven't had. There hasn't been a good spot to kind of like slip that in. Is like sort of a. You are familiar with the lazy Return of the Lazy DM sort of way of prepping a game. This would be something that would go under secrets and clues. So this is kind of news of the world. I just haven't had an opportunity for that to kind of come up, especially since they did some stuff at the Cooperage, which we're about to talk about, which is why that was where I was assuming that they were going to come into contact with the lumber wagon, but they've done other things at the Cooperage instead. But we did do Zarnok's dream, because they did sleep. And this was sort of like a little reminder for that player. It'd be like, hey, you had this brother who also was doing the same thing you do, this Trials of Arte. Which is essentially they're trying to collect enough signatures, essentially signing off on great deeds that they've done, to basically pull themselves out of indenture and become a free citizen again through their mercenary group. So it's kind of a PR thing for the mercenary group. Been very interesting. And they haven't done a ton on it, but I did want to, since they haven't done anything on it, I wanted to bring that back up. And this is one of those time things with backstories, as he sort of remembers his brother who did these trials as well and failed rather stupendously. But now thinking about, they're at a point in which their brother was gone for about the same amount of time, and they were starting to hear deeds of the things that their brother had done. But that player character hasn't really done anything yet, so it was a little bit of a prod in the behind to be like, hey, you need to start moving on this for your own personal glory. So we started off beginning of the session. We're opening it with combat, because that's where we stopped last time. We'd rolled initiative, so we already had that done. We did that at the end of last session, which is a nice little trick if you ever want to do that, is to roll the initiative for combat at the end of the session and then start the combat in the next session. Gives you a nice little way to end the session on a high note, really. So they are in the cooperage, which is a place where they make barrels primarily, and there's only 2 player characters involved in this fight. So we have some other people sitting at the table who are not otherwise engaged with the game. And that's not a great way to be, and you know that D&D combat specifically is going to take a while. So it's not going to be a quick scene. So what I did is I printed out these stat blocks for some of the NPCs and the monsters that we have, the creatures that we have, and I was like, and then I handed them out to the other players, let them choose which ones they wanted to play, so that way they got to play with it, and then they have pretty clear goals. Stop the people who are robbing and destroying property in the cooperage. So we have 2 half-elf bandits, that Caleb played those. We had 2 mastiffs, who... somebody played... I think Zarnok was playing those. They wrote Zarnok down here. I don't remember. It's been a couple weeks. So we had some guard dogs, we had some bandits, we had an overseer, and we had our 2 PCs and 1 Bloody Heather, which is a mercenary group, who is moonlighting, or they've been hired, so it's not really moonlighting, serving as additional town guard for the festival that's coming up. They've been deputized, sort of. And so yeah, that's the situation. So that was kind of where everything started off. And how did that fight go? The fight went pretty well. Let's go down here. We can just jump into the session as we want. And that was really it. Like that's all the prep, by the way. This one sheet. I was like, I knew there was a fight. I knew that was going to take a long time, because it always doesn't. And then everything was really open-ended, so I knew that they were just going to kind of be running around town trying to have some to-dos. We had some stuff, so I just kind of wrote down a few bullet points for each of the player characters that I knew were going to be there for things that they could get into. So we knew that there was, Caleb, who's our cleric, is going to be asking about Kishani Khalid, about the whale remains that are on a mountaintop. They have the Mist Fairy, Euphorium, Ingenue, requesting a star rating. So just some light RP stuff, because I didn't know at that point. It's hard to prep because I didn't know where they were going to go. So I just kind of wrote out some bullet points for each of these guys. Severin, I knew was going to go back and get their lodestone, which they did, which has a short-term disabled flicker. And Kishani Khalid is not back. Swain is going to meet the fishers and get paid, and potentially get some more work from those fishers. And the croupier is called downstairs and hasn't been seen since. They did see them at the end of that episode, though. Or session. Zarnok meet Lily at the Pole and Pint, which is the big tavern. Learn about the Giantkin raiders, and that Lily hasn't heard from an acquaintance that lives alone on the island that's just off a larger island in the harbor. So yeah, that's it. That was the whole prep for the session. It's pretty much this. It's one page. That's it. And it went pretty well. They did. I figured that this whatever was going to happen at the cooperage was going to spiral out into something. It was probably going to be messy. It was. And continues to be. So I knew that was going to be a lot of probably the session. So I didn't want to plan a whole bunch of stuff knowing that was probably going to be a non-starter for a lot of that stuff. So let's just rock through the session. So this is just a recap of things that actually happened. As you can see, it's a bit long. So we opened with the fight in the cooperage. We let the players that were not in the scene control some of the NPCs and gave them some sort of motivation of what they wanted. Swain escaped, but was followed by the Cooper's dogs and guards on his scent. Charles Rogel, his Bloody Heather guard, expert door kicker, as he rolls. I believe he rolled something stupid, like a 20 something to kick down a door. So we call him an expert door kicker. And former pirate? Question mark. So I did this thing where we let one of the players kind of take over this first introduction of this NPC, which from everything that I've heard, that player really enjoyed. And if you have I think could be a useful thing if you have a player who has the itch real bad, where they're, this sort of player, probably, who makes a bunch of characters, having them be able to step in and just control an NPC for a little bit and set that up can kind of scratch that itch for them, I think. This was not something I was planning to do. I literally had this player was just in charge of this character, and then combat ended, and they just kind of were still like assuming that role, and I was like, all right, you can be that character, the NPC. I'll just give you some gentle direction if you get off book. I was able to do that, and so that is something. And I got feedback at the end of the game; they really enjoyed that. So that's something that I'll try to look to do more in the future. It's kind of a offhand thing, off the cuff thing. So I hadn't really planned that. It's just something that we just kind of did. I just kind of rolled with it because they were just kind of still in control of the character. So we'll do that. We'll lean in and try to do that. I don't know how I'm going to set those up in the future. That's going to be an interesting thing for me to figure out. Severin got detained as being the person who had called over the Bloody Heather Guard. Basically called over the constable, police, whatever, the guards, essentially. So he got detained to ask about it. So he spent most of his evening at the guard station. Zarnak had a dream about his brother's first success. We already talked about that on the Trials of Arte. And how you're at the same point and don't have a lot to show for it. So again, it's sort of like a kind of a stick prod rather than a carrot prod. Be like, hey, you need to go do the thing. That's like your personal thing, your personal characterization. They did learn that the sailors' orders, so the two half-elf bandits were sailors, and the sailors' orders were to ship out on the Flaming Pike a merchantman, a potential pirate ship under the command of Captain Tilzo, a person they have not met yet. And Swing's player is convinced that the Flaming Pike is the way into... I didn't finish that sentence. Yeah, we'll just say underground dealings. So, that player is very much convinced that this is sort of what is going to be an approximation of the Thieves Guild. Thing is, that's not right. There's already a Thieves Guild in the town, and the players have just been sort of like around the periphery of it. And we've used some terms with them, and they're still trying to kind of piece those clues together. This is what's going on. They just haven't really asked anybody about it. They asked one person about it, and they were, as you might expect, rather cagey about giving them answers, given the subject matter. Severin wowed Charles Rogel in his sort of interrogation room, and it convinced him that he could put in a good word with Lady Pearl, who is a courtesan that they know, and they were staying at their home, which he very much liked the sound of that. She is sort of a well-to-do lady of the night, and he's a random guard, so he's like, yeah, that'd be great, actually, to have an opportunity to see Lady Pearl. For the rest of our friends, the guards bang on Pearl's door in the morning, because that's where they're staying. The Pearl Steward and Zarnog face off against some Bloody Heather goons, and turn them away because they don't have basically any sort of warrant or anything to enter the premises. They kind of turn them away at the door. It does not earn them any friends. The steward kind of uninvites the group from them at that, being that, she works in a profession in which discretion is appreciated. So it's like, you guys gotta go. You can't be bringing guards to our doors. That's not cool. And so they're like, you gotta get the hell out of here. So it's only a matter of time before Charles Rogel does his investigation thing and discovers that Severin was lodging at the same place that the Cooper's dogs followed Swing's trail to. Unfortunately, Swing just did not roll really well enough to sort of disguise his tracks. And the dogs have come back, and the guards are there. And so it's really only a matter of time before Charles Rogel realizes that Severin was also staying at that place, realized that Severin was also at the crime scene, and that so Severin is also probably implicated in that crime. So we have this sort of like detective sleuthing that's going on in the background. That's a fun little thing for me to play as a dungeon master or game master. So this NPC is their own main character in this side story in which they're trying to investigate what happened there and put the pieces together, and will eventually come to that realization. Severin collects the lodestone from Shamash Khadijah. Did that. So Khadijah asked Severin to repay her. Khadijah is a lady. She asked Severin to repay her by checking out the whale on the mountainside a few hours away. They're not doing that, so he was like, And the group decided they were going to go to Zigartes Mania, which is the big temple that's out in the harbor on an island. While they were waiting for the ferry to get back, Zarnok found Lily as the ferry actually comes in. He has that discussion with Lily because she's looking for somebody to be on that ferry boat, and who she's looking for is not there. A former adventurer hermit who lives off on a little island next to the big island with a temple on it. And so they kind of discussed that. She also confirmed the giant canyon in the northeast of the island that they're on, which is something that she had already spoken to, or that, I can't remember if she spoke to. Severin had already learned about, but in this way Zarnok learned about it. Who's been the person who has been most pointedly interested in that thread. They do hear the tower bell ring, and they can see a large ship being towed into port. And I wrote down here, because I didn't say what the ship was, but they really focused in on the Flaming Pike, so that's going to be the Flaming Pike that's coming into port. Swain and an older fisherman strike up a conversation that is laced with a bunch of double talk that Swain kind of does middling at. Swain failed his inside check to confirm this is the person who hired the half-elves, but this random person did pay them 6 gold, which is presumably payment for the work they just did overnight at the cooperage, where they were fouling the barrels. But I don't think that Swain's player has necessarily put that together. But did offer more work. They're about to leave for a final fishing run before the festival, and Swain convinced all his fellows to go, and they were like, well, we gotta go now because it's the end of the day, it's fishing time. And so they show off in a flotilla of small fishing boats. As they leave port, Swain specifically catches the eye of a body being pulled out of the harbor and recognizes it as the croupier from the Bloody Seven being pulled out of the water, which is the dealer at the private club, definitely organized crime, the guild that they've kind of been on the periphery of. Realize that it is somebody from that, and they are very much dead, and that is the person that Swain had cheated at cards during. And then Zarnok saw Swain looking at that, and then kind of like put the pieces together. Because Zarnok was also in that scene, so he recognizes that person as well. So I was going to jump back here at the start of this session, of the last session, to be like Charles Rogan. He's Rogel. Charles Rogel. Running down the wharf after them, Angry Thieves. I decided not to do that in the end, so I'll just go ahead and move that. So yeah, I ended up moving that. I'm going to move that and press that off for later, based off of what we're about to talk about, sort of this post-session feedback. So, as usual, I end every session that I run kind of asking like questions, comments, concerns, things you like, things you don't like. Try to get some feedback so I understand, what the players are engaging with, what they don't really like. So we can try to make a more fun game together. It's just a thing that I do. I got it from I think D6 Mafia, and they haven't uploaded anything in a very long time. But it was another sort of like live play thing, live play D&D session, which I thought I really liked it. It was a very fun sort of campaign and world. But that's how they always ended the session. Their Dungeon Master always ended the session. I always really like that. Being like, okay, make a call, try to get some feedback, see what people like, what are latching onto, what do the players like, what do they don't like, so that way we can all together kind of make a better game. So, what did we learn? The players that were not in the Cooperish team really liked playing the monsters NPCs. I was not really expecting that. I was just trying to be like, hey, here's something for you to do, so you guys aren't just staring off into space. And they appreciate being able to like keep playing when they're not in the scene. So I was like, okay, that's a good note. I got more notes on that later. So I do think that this is the thing they're going to try to bring in. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, because I also don't want to bloat really minor interactions, so I don't want to do things where, oh, one of the player characters goes to a shop, and then I have a different player play the shopkeep, and that turns into like a 20-minute back and forth talk. Like, I want to avoid that when we want it to be snappy. So I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to implement that. I talked with them about doing what I would consider a pro player tip, which is using the buddy system. This campaign, because it's been the idea of this campaign and the feedback that I got is they really wanted to play a very player-forward, player-driven kind of campaign. And we've gotten 7 sessions into it, and they haven't done a whole lot. And that is, I think this is one of the situations that kind of comes up when you have players who are newer to the hobby, and by that I mean they come in through something, and their only real experience has been through something like 5th edition, which is very much what I would consider a very plot-forward style of play in general. The idea is that the Dungeon Master will come up with a story and present it to the players, which is very different than something that's maybe a little bit more OSR, a little bit more hex crawly, which is actually a game that I prefer to run a little bit more, which is that the players kind of come up with, like, you have a thing that you want to do, and then you go do that thing, and you guys kind of all assist each other in doing those things collaboratively to kind of many hands make light work kind of situation. And so that way the group's strong because they're relying on each other to help them. But that really hasn't manifested very much. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, so let's just talk about the buddy system. What I was getting to is that they split off all the time, where each PC, and when you have 5 PCs in a party, individually go, and one of the problems you have is that if you're playing, for mathematics sakes, a 5-hour game, that only means that each player really only plays an hour, which is not a great amount of downtime. There's a whole bunch of downtime when they're playing, when they're not actively in the scene. There's more time they spend waiting to play than actually playing. And so one of the pro player tip that I talked to them about is like, hey, do a buddy system thing. Whenever you're going to go do something, bring somebody else with you. Or if you see somebody going off to do their individual stuff, like, tag along, if you can. Sometimes, based off of what the player's character's actually doing, that doesn't make sense. Like, they're trying to do something they're trying to keep on the down low. Obviously, they're not going to want anybody with them. But generally, they're just kind of going and doing stuff. So, like, a good example is Severin going to the temple to get the lodestone. Could have asked somebody to come with them. Zarnok kind of tried to go with them, but they kind of, in character, kind of missed the connection and didn't go. But doing things like that really, and it's very helpful for me as Dungeon Master and Game Master, instead of trying to keep track of 5 different things, if I'm only having to keep track of 2 to 3 things, that makes things a lot easier. And it means that more people get time to play and ask questions and meet with people. And it's overall just better. It doesn't make sense, and I think, especially with newer D&D, that there is this sort of idea that all the player characters go for everything. They always stick together. And I think that kind of comes out of that ruling being that old chestnut of, don't split the party. It's like, you can split the party, but that doesn't mean the entire party needs to scatter. So find sort of a midpoint in the middle kind of works pretty well. Because sometimes it just makes sense. If you're like, we want to accomplish 2 to 3 things, and rather than have that take 3 times as long, we're going to split up into 3 different groups with 2 people here, 2 people here, and 1 person's going to go off and do this other thing. That's reasonable, and that means when you're using, it makes a lot of in-game sense. Be like, well, we have 2 hours, we need to do these things in 2 hours, we're going to split up to do those things. Yes, absolutely, that makes sense. Obviously, you guys wouldn't all run together, because you wouldn't get it all done in 2 hours. So you can rely on some of that. So, but that was my sort of tip for them, being like, hey, if you guys, and then I think this is like the second time I brought it up to them, been like, hey, if you guys don't like always completely split up the party, you guys will get to play a little bit more, and more things will happen, because we're not trying to do 1 hour of game time, of in-game time being like the 4 hours that we play. Other feedback, they would like me to use a map, or at least sketch out the scene to avoid situations, which was something that happened in the Cooperage. Severn being inside the Cooperage fence when the Severn's player thought that they were outside the Cooperage fence. Which ended up with them getting sort of attacked by dogs. Not a huge deal, but it is, like, I understand. We had sort of like a physical description down, just trying to do it quick and dirty. I found that the more that I play, the less I like to use maps, but this would have been helpful in that situation. We did sort of a similar thing in the last session, though I could have actually, I had a map with me and I thought about drawing out the boats, but I didn't really need to, I don't think, because it's a pretty static combat. There wasn't a lot of dynamic moving around, because they were on boats. Small boats, too. Other things, Severn's player is getting antsy for a level up, and is wanting something to galvanize the group together, a la trauma bonding. They need something that, this is something that this player has brought up, I think, twice now, and like, they don't feel like the group is really like a cohesive unit. It just feels like a collection of individuals, which I agree with. And we discussed again that given the sort of player input before the campaign was going to be heavily player driven rather than plot driven. And this player absolutely understands that. It's like, and reinforcing with them is like, if your player characters do not take proactive action, and you guys kind of sit around and don't do anything, and you lose money. And the RP is great. I really like that they're getting their elbows up to their elbows in the setting. They're really deep in it. They're talking to a lot of NPCs. They're understanding a lot about the world. Really love that stuff. But that is coming at the expense of not really doing anything, which is why we've now done, I guess now 8 sessions, and they haven't leveled up. They're still level 1. It's because, well, you guys started one adventure and then noped out of a dungeon after the second room of the dungeon. So you didn't complete it, so you didn't get leveled up. And so we're doing milestone leveling, obviously, rather than straight XP leveling. And so, and let them know that sort of at the beginning of the campaign, it's like, once you guys do something of note, when you put a button on a situation, kind of bring it to its natural conclusion, you'll get some sort of level up, or something else, usually a level up. But you guys haven't done that yet. You've been faffing about for, I guess, about a week and a half now. Haven't really accomplished a ton. So, I mean, I guess you could say getting to the town was its own accomplishment, but I don't know. That doesn't seem like a notable event, just getting to a place. Because it's not like it was in the middle of the wilderness or anything like that. So, that was the previous session. Let's talk a little bit. Actually, what I want to do is I want to talk about my Sunday game a little bit. So, in the game I play on Sunday, I am a player, not the DM. And we had an input, which we did, and here, I'll just chatting. So what we did is, the session's fine. DM's quite good, but we did get to a puzzle, and I generally have issues with puzzles in tabletop RPGs. If you have watched the channel before, you will probably know this, but I don't actually like puzzles in my TTRPGs very much. They're just not... I just think that they don't work very well. I think a lot of them have the problem of the old Harry Potter Ravenclaw common room, where instead of having a password, they have like a riddle, and everybody's like, well, that's just significantly less secure, which doesn't make sense for people who are supposed to be smart. If Ravenclaws are supposed to be the smarty pants of Hogwarts, then why would their common room be the easiest one to break into? It is, like, I understand that it's supposed to be like an intelligence flex, but they're like, the practicality of that is not very good. Oh yeah, you agree? You don't like puzzles and investigations like a murder mystery? I'm okay with investigations. I actually like investigations a lot, but I don't like puzzles necessarily. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear why you're not big on investigation. I do know that there are players that are just like, in my Sunday group, we definitely have a player who just kind of nopes out of investigation scenes, that is just not their thing, and they just kind of, they go on the idle, essentially. And they kind of fill their own time. And so it's really just two of us as players who do like investigations, are very much like in it. But yeah, I'd be interested to see why you don't like investigations as much. I think that would be helpful to know. But yeah, and puzzles for me, and so we had a puzzle, and I want to talk a little bit about this puzzle because I think it did a good job. I don't think the puzzle is necessarily bad, is the thing. Like, this is not to say that the Dungeon Master did a bad job. I just think it did a good job of highlighting why, to me, why I don't really like them, and really kind of put it in a very succinct thing that I was thinking about while we were playing it. So we get to this thing, we're underwater, and we're looking at these tableaus, so 7 different scenes of Trident history. And we need to basically, the puzzle is know our history, learn from our mistakes, kind of thing. So we don't repeat them. So there are 7 tableaus, and there is sort of a gamified sort of like, I guess, disc? I can't remember. That has like has 4 quadrants in it. So we have 7 things, 4 quadrants. Each of those things has like a little light up like nodule to basically be like, I select this one. So one of the issues that we kind of immediately had is that nobody in the party is Trident. We have 2 Tridents with us, but we don't really know the history of the Tridents. We know a little bit about it. Like, we know that they were in the elemental plane of water, and they had basically an exodus into the prime material plane where they were chased because they were being hunted and chased by big things like krakens and abominations of that stuff from the elemental plane of water. And so they fled that plane into the material plane. Unfortunately, as they did that, some of those things also are now able to pass into the prime material plane. So that's basically what we know about them. And they've become this sort of warlike society to help to pay for their guilt of basically opening a doorway which allows these great monsters to find their way into the prime material plane. They become this very warlike species that their prime purpose, they feel like, as a society, is to stop those things or kill those things when they come through. So it's very, very interesting. But the player characters, our party, are not Tridents, and we don't really know more specifics about their situation other than that. You just started a new campaign with a group, like 6 to 7 sessions in, and investigations to you feel like tedious, just like work, having to memorize and remember specific details. Okay, yeah, no, I understand that. Okay. Yeah, I can see. And it's really kind of making sure that, I think this is one of those things where the knowing the player archetypes, knowing your players' archetypes as a Dungeon Master and Game Master are really, really important. So, and that's the thing that I use both as a player and as a DM when I sit down at my table and look at my different players. and I go, okay, what does this player like? And what do they not like? And that helps me try to figure out what kind of things to put into the game. Like I said, in the Sunday game that we're talking about right now, we have a player who is very much just actor. I would say an actor and a slayer archetype. They like to rip things up, and they like to be their character, and that's sort of their primary goal. So anything that comes to things like investigations, murder mysteries, that kind of stuff that we're talking about, they just kind of nope out of. They're just like, I'm not interested in this, or this puzzle that we're talking about. Not interested in that. And so they're just kind of on a sidebar. So for this one specifically, we have 7 tableaus. And I think this immediately kind of brings in one of the issues that we had. So we have this light up thing that's got quadrants on it. But there are 7 different tableaus to choose from. And I think just in the description, it was not clear, at least to me, and I don't think it was clear to the player who was trying to figure it out with me, that we only needed 4 of them instead of 7. So we were taking the idea, because we don't really know anything about treading history, that we needed to put the 7 in order. But the truth is that 3 of them are little red herrings, and only 4 of them are actual things that happened. But since we don't know the history, we didn't know that, so we kind of assumed that, oh, well, we're given 7 things, so obviously these 7 things happened, we just need to put them in order, based off the premise. So, that was sort of a miscommunication. And I think our DM was really good about trying to nudge that by showing off, like, the 4 quadrants, but we just were not making that connection. That we needed to choose only 4 of them, and that 3 were red herrings. And especially kind of considering the campaign and how it's gone, and the story that's kind of come out of it, is that there are lots of things that we just like, lots of question marks and things that people don't know. So I think our immediate assumption was that when we were talking to the Tritons that we did have with us, was that when they went, oh, well, I don't know what this scene is, what this tableau is. So it doesn't mean anything to me. We were like, oh, okay, so this is just like a gap in historical knowledge of the species, probably. Rather than, that was our initial conclusion, rather than, oh, well, then that's not a real thing. So I think that was the primary confusion that we had. You don't mind investigations either, but when it's 7 sessions straight, it just gets bored. There's no good mix. Oh, but there was a short dungeon crawl in the middle of it. Oh, yeah. I guess if it's hard to do a long-term mystery like that. If you're doing a long-term investigation, that is really difficult to pull off of. Yeah. I try to keep each plot pretty short if I can. I feel like that works better. That's just kind of been my personal experience. I think the sweet spot for me is about 2 to 3 sessions for any kind of one plot is a good mix. That's why I build dungeons that usually have about 7 rooms in them, because that's about 2 to 3 sessions of play. And I feel like that's just enough to feel like it's more than something like a 5-room dungeon. More than like a 5-room dungeon, which is like you get it done in 1 session. It's a little bit more meaty than that, but it's not so long that you start to forget about things that have happened. Which I think is what you're kind of talking about, is that when it's 7 sessions straight, yeah, when you have to memorize and remember all those specific details, that becomes really difficult to do. So yeah, I can see how that works out that way. So that's why I'm always like, I try to keep it as succinct as I can, whenever possible. So we have these 7 different tableaus, we have the 4 quadrants, and then we were like, okay, so we just activate them. And we're asking the Tritons that we have with us, but they're not able to give us information about 3 of the 7, which is, doing quick math, what is the percentage of that? Yeah, so they're not able to give us information about 43% of the puzzle. So we're like, I don't know what to do. And we don't know like I said, I think our assumption is that they didn't know these things, so these were like secret things, secret histories that have been, you know, scrubbed from the government's narrative of history. So I think that was our assumption, was that we were learning more things by looking at these tableaus, and not like, oh, 3 of these tableaus are just not things that happen. They're just fake. They're just cop-outs. Especially when we were looking at, and I think it does a lot with the puzzle setup. So the puzzle setup was that, oh, there's this guarded area that nobody can get into, that people have tried to and they can't get into it. So that, I think, as presumably Trident, so I think that was what put that earworm in us, like this little stake in our mind, that we were like, oh, so this must be like secret histories that you guys don't know, and that's why it's difficult for you guys to undo this thing. Kind of figure out that stuff. So I don't know. It's I think that's why we kind of got there. This is one of the reasons why I don't think puzzles are really. I think they're hard to implement really well. Personally, you think the long-term investigations might have been alright for players if, like, players were, for example, accused of being the murderers. And they had to find the real culprit. Yeah, if there was mistaken identity kind of a situation. Yeah, if it was specifically tied to that, I think that would be also hard to play as, though. Because I think you would get to the point where you didn't feel like you'd be able to talk to people without them, you know, whistleblowing you. I think that would be difficult to get things done. But yeah, I like that. I'm not sure I could do it for 7+ sessions. I think that would be really tough. Lower the background music. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can lower the background music a little bit. There we go. We'll lower it just a little bit. Perfect. So yeah, it kind of set us in this thing, and so eventually we just kind of, at some point, was like, we have to pull the trigger on something. And so we were trying to set them up in an arrangement, still of 7. And then the feedback of the quadrants was also a little bit, I think we got there, but it was not super clear in the beginning as to when things, so these quadrants on the disc would light up and then flicker, and that was supposed to kind of tell us which ones were right, or if it was right but maybe in the wrong spot. It's just, the feedback is really difficult. So I mean, we did our best. I feel like that puzzle took longer than it should have. I feel like if we had understood what the puzzle was going to be, like if we fully understood the puzzle, how it was set up, that probably would have been like a 10-minute thing. But instead it was significantly longer than that, like exponentially longer than that, because we were trying to figure it out. And so yeah, I think that's the puzzle thing. And also, like, why would when it came down to, oh no, this is just things that the Tridents know, like the NPCs, there's no reason the NPCs that were with us couldn't have solved that puzzle, couldn't have just walked up and been like, boop, 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 that's it, alright, let's go. So yeah, that's the thing about the strange thing about this puzzle in particular, because it does, I don't even think that it's a bad puzzle. I think it's just really good at highlighting why I don't like puzzles. Number one, like things like the NPC should just be able to just do this, so it's really not a non-issue for the party if the NPCs take point and just solve the puzzle because they know their own history, which they could have easily done. But then it's like, why are we have something in our path that the player characters aren't like the main characters of, which is also weird. So it's just, it's a bit of a fumble, I think. And that's nothing against the Dungeon Master who's running it, my friend who's running it. He's doing a great job. I'm not saying that he's not. I'm saying that, like, this, it really just, for me, really highlighted, like, specifically why I don't like puzzles. Where I'm like, oh, that's just so, it's such a weird gamey thing to be in a game that really, at least for me, really takes me out of my character, that roleplay aspect of my character. And I'm like, oh, well, I gotta figure out, now I've just gotta sit down and do a puzzle. I think like if I'm thinking about situations in which puzzles actually make sense, I think the closest thing that I could think of when I was kind of mulling this over in my mind are like the shrines in something like Breath of the Wild, where the idea is they are supposed to be proving grounds for the hero. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. It makes sense that they're set up to be like here for Link to relearn and master his tool set. I'm like, that makes sense. That makes sense why it's there and why you put some sort of piece of power behind that. That sort of moat that they get when they come out for clearing the puzzle or the combat and all that stuff. Or sometimes, you know, you just get the thing because you found it. It's just finding the shrine is the difficult part. So that's like the one that kind of comes to my mind as being like, that's a good implementation of puzzles. That kind of makes a diegetic sense within the world why they're set up this way, and are set up specifically for one person. And I don't think the shrines even come out until after you do like the plateau stuff, right? So you're doing stuff on the plateau, and that's when they start showing up. After you activate the first tower? Oh, man, it's been years since I played the game. So it makes sense that like nobody else has done them yet and gotten the things out of it. Yeah, very much. So for me, that's kind of like the gold standard for me. It's like, oh, that makes sense to have puzzles in the game then. Like that makes sense. In the same way that it makes sense for me why there are dungeons in a game like Earth Dawn, because Earth Dawn has a very specific reason for why dungeons exist, which is basically cosmic horrors are coming to the planet to eat everything on it, and you guys know that, and everybody in the world spent a bunch of time preparing for it. So they made the underground cities, and they knew it was going to last a long time. So it makes sense that there are these massive sprawling dungeons underneath the surface. And some creatures did, some ancestors did weird things, like there are elves that have spines all over them. They basically made themselves like porcupines to stop monsters from eating them. Genetically altered themselves, essentially. Very interesting setting. Can't really recommend the game system, which is very crunchy. Very, very much a product of the, I guess, 3rd edition, 90s style kind of TTRPG. But the setting's really cool, and it does technically take place in the same world or same universe as Shadowrun, which is fun. And that's something you struggle with as the DM. When things seem obvious to you as the DM, but more difficult for players to figure out. Yeah, it's always tough. That's why it always feels like you have to pull out the Puzzles for Babies book, or Riddles for Babies book, to make stuff up, because you're like, it's very obvious to me, but I made it, so of course I always knew what the answer was. So trying to confer that knowledge to your players without just giving them immediately the answer is really difficult. And I do think that is, you're correct. That is one of the things I think makes puzzles really hard to run. Which I think is a good thing. So I want to talk about a dungeon that I am brewing up for my Friday game. So again, if you're a player in my Friday game, stop watching this. What are you doing? Get out of here. Get out of here. Which I think some people would classify as a puzzle, but it's really just a trap. And so that's how I do it. So there's going to be a chamber, like a chapel sort of area, which is going to have these caryatids or telemons of, which is a very, very fancy architectural term for pillars that are just carved into people's images of the gods that kind of line the chapel room as sort of buttresses to like hold up the ceiling. And as they step into the room, all the statues of the gods their eyes are going to light up. There's 7 gods, so there's 4 on one side, 3 on the other, and in between these 2 on this side, in the middle, there is a doorway, and then there's a doorway at the far end. And so as they walk into the room, those eyes will light up, and at the end of each of their turns, whoever's on the floor, they will roll a die, probably a d6. If they roll odds, the side with odd will fire their golden beams, and on this side, if they roll evens, the side with the evens will roll beams. And so they're set, they are interlaced. So four rows of 5x5 squares will be lit up from these side, and from this side you're gonna have 3 come across. And you're like, I think, because I was thinking about my players and interacting with it, I think my players are going to walk into that room and assume it's a puzzle, unfortunately. Even though I don't like to run puzzles, and it's not a puzzle. So I was like, one of the things that I came up with the room as I was doing it is like, alright, well, you're going to have these blank spaces in the walls in between the different statues. So I was like, oh, well, there'll be like little recesses that have like braziers in it or something, just to light up the room. I was just thinking like set dressing kind of stuff. But as I thought about that, I was like, oh, they're definitely going to walk into that room, see the unlit braziers, and be like, we've got to light up the braziers. Because, of course, that's going to be the weird leap that they're going to make, rather than just be like, we just need to get through the room. That's it. They're going to try to turn off the trap. And so to turn off the trap, I was like, all right, well, then, yeah, they can do however they figure out to turn off the braziers. That will turn off, I don't know, maybe I'll make it turn off the statue that's across from it. Maybe it will be like once they turn them all on, it'll go off. That's something that I'm going to leave to myself to improvise when I actually run this thing. That I'll deal with. So if they're doing well, then I'll be like, they need to turn them all off, if they decide to do that. Or if they're not doing well, and be like, oh well, you can individually turn them off. And then that becomes kind of a non-issue. Because I'm pretty sure... Yes, one of my player characters, for sure has Firebolt. It is like their one combat spell. They have Firebolt. Which can do that. Can set up the braziers. Now, I do think that the braziers are going to be old, and they're going to be like, the flames are immediately going to be guttering. So it's not going to stay lit for a while, so it's still not going to be like, oh, this is a permanent solution kind of thing. Unless they go over there and like put new torches in there, or put some lamp oil in there or something. They're going to have to do something else to do that. But that is something, so that's something that I'm setting up that is not a puzzle, but I assume that my players will treat it as a puzzle. And so we'll pretend it's a puzzle. But I'm like, it's just a trap. It's just, you're not supposed to be in here. The trap activates, and the trap's fun because it basically what it does is it hits them with this golden beam and essentially it's going to do a little bit of damage to them. Basically not at all. I think it's going to do 1 hit point of damage. Because they're still level 1, so I can't do a ton of damage to them. What it's going to do is it's going to actually put over their skin this layer of like gold flake. Gold paper. And I'm just going off the old James Bond myth, because it's not real, is that the Bond girl that got painted with gold paint was like poisoned and suffocating from it, which is not true. They used appropriately safe paint, but I did like the idea. It's like, oh well, they're thieves that are coming into this place to potentially rob it, and we're going to cover them in gold, and that gold will be the thing that kills them. It'll be their greed that will kill them, which feels like a very appropriate punishment for something that's clearly like a chapel, like a religious area. Well, so for them to deal with, and however they deal with it, and I've got some lead up to that where they're going to have clues about that puzzle before they get to it. Like, they're going to find somebody who's dead already. They're going to find a whole bunch of, like, gold flake on their bodies. To give them little question marks above their heads, like, what the hell? What the heck's going on here? And, of course, somebody's going to try to collect that gold flake. And so I'll make it of a small amount of monetary value, but it's really going to be a big time waster if they try to collect all these, like, super thin flecks of gold. So it'll be a pain in the butt for them. But if they want to do that, that's fine. But as they do that, of course, I'm going to be rolling for wandering monster checks. They might have some sort of random encounters. The more time that you guys waste in the dungeon, in and around the dungeon, the more likely it is that you're going to get into a fight that you're probably not going to get a lot out of. to kind of get the put the stick on their bottoms and kind of motivate them to be like, hey, you need to keep moving. Like, this is not a safe place for you guys. There are going to be monsters who show up and do stuff like that. Oh, those are actually fun. Not a puzzle like the brazier, but just a requirement or a trap. Like one step logic type things that don't require a lot of deep thought. Yeah, I think so. Because I think one of the issues that I have, and I think this going back to the 7 tableaus, is that is a choke point. If we cannot progress in the adventure, because we need to get through that doorway. If we don't figure out that puzzle, we're stuck. We cannot progress in the adventure. And I don't like those. Those are really bad to have choke points like that in any sort of adventure, but especially something like a dungeon, where you're like, if you can't figure this out, you're not going to be able to get into the rest of the dungeon. So even in that room, like I said, there's 2 other exits in that room. They can just run across the room and into those doorways if they want to. There's no doors there. They're open doorways. They can literally just run across the room, get in there, take a little bit of damage, and just get over there. But the gold flake, once it gets on them, will slow them down, and then I think it paralyzes them, and then I think it knocks them unconscious, and they have to start doing death saving throws. So it is something that just kind of like comes up, and it will be a hindrance for them. But they can very much just run across the room if they want to, and they can get across that room in probably 2-3 turns, because it's a large room. So that's kind of the difficulty, is just getting across the room. But yeah, hey, how are you doing? Nice to see you. But yeah, that's sort of the situation that we're kind of in. So yeah, and that's just personal gaming style, where I'm just not a fan of puzzles in general. I just don't. I think they're really, really hard to pull off in a challenge way that is fun. I think it's really difficult to do. I just think it's a really difficult thing to pull off in any ways. So yeah. So that's sort of my own thing about puzzles, and why I usually don't include them in my games, because I feel like they can be these weird choke points, and then usually if I'm going to do something like a puzzle, I provide some other way for them to get around. Like, they don't have to go through that room. They can I think they can get to everywhere else in the... Actually, they kind of have... Getting into that room is already a pain in the butt. But yeah, they can go through a different entrance and hit every other room in the dungeon. I'm looking at the dungeon layout because I'm working on it with my chicken scratch. Yeah, they can go through a different entrance, and they can get to every room inside the dungeon without having to actually deal with that room that has that puzzle in it. To deal with that room with the trap. They can reach every other place. So there's a nice loop in the middle of the dungeon that allows them to get wherever they want. So if they have difficulty, or they get scared off of it, and they decide to, they can go in a different way and make their way around. Oh, how am I? I'm doing alright. I'm doing okay. It's not too bad. Just doing this. We're about to jump back in, and I think we're going to talk about my other game, the game that I just ran yesterday. We're going to talk about that game. Oh, you're a big fan of the old solo RPG video. Oh, thank you. Yeah. You wanted to try solo RPG stuff for a while. Yeah, it's fun. It's a very different way to kind of play the game. But if you are if you are someone who doesn't get to play as a player very often, it's fun to do that if you're a forever DM kind of situation. Or if you're somebody who is interested in just playing more, maybe you have a group of friends who, you know, your game doesn't play very often. I think it's a fun way to kind of get your D&D fix a little bit, or whatever TTRPG you're playing, to get that fix. I also think it's really good for people who are thinking about, or not even just thinking about, but I think it's really useful that I've seen in my own life, play with players who think, oh, I can never be a dungeon master. I'd be like, well, let's do some solo RPG or GM-less game where we're both going to play players, and you'll get to experience how actually not difficult it is to be the dungeon master, because you're going to have to do some of it. But yeah, I need to get back to the solo RPG stuff. We're just at a very specific point, and I haven't had the time to sit down and figure out what that next session's going to be. Because I know everything's kind of coming to a head with Renfire. And I want to do it, but now enough time has gone past that I need to sit down and probably watch the last episode of it, because it's been a minute, and figure out what that next session's going to be like. Because I think it's going to be a big session, and probably a big fight. And I need to be prepared for that, because there's going to be a lot of bad guys and a lot of good guys. And that's going to be it's probably just going to be one big fight episode. And I need to prepare for that. So, that's unfortunately why I've just kind of had it off to the side. And I've got a bunch of other stuff that's kind of going on. Which includes some of the stuff that's behind me, which is me trying to clean up and change up this office space. I got a lot of irons in the fire as it is, and so unfortunately that's just kind of been on the wayside right now. But I do want to get back to it. I do want to do it. I am motivated. I'm not bored with that character. I'm not bored with that story. I want to do it. It takes a little bit more than I've got the bandwidth for right now. All right, but yeah, so that was what happened in my Sunday game. That's everything that happened in last week's game. So we are going to jump in. Let's talk about session 8, which is the session that I just ran yesterday. So I do think that I've hit the sweet spot now. We saw in the last session that I really only prepped one scene and then kind of riffed off of whatever they were going to do, which was a lot of running away from the guards kind of stuff. So this is session 8. In this one, I basically have this 2 pages of prep. Because again, we had a situation where it's like, I kind of need to know what they want to do. And once I know what they want to do, I'll have a better idea to have more specific prep. This is why I started prepping this dungeon. I knew that they were probably going to go in this area. I knew that I had this, so I've been sitting on this for about a week already. So I knew that they were probably going to head in that direction. So I just needed to put the opportunity in front of them. Yeah, we're going to get back to the solo RPG stuff. It's not... Don't worry. And I'm not going to let that lie. It's not really for me thinking about the story or stuff like this. I'm more about small things like details or strategy. So I guess I'm more of a player guy. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with focusing in on those details and the strategy. Yeah. And then thinking about the story. The nice thing is that as a dungeon master... the players kind of make the story. You just kind of put stuff in front of them. I think where dungeon masters, game masters get in a real bad spot is when they have a story already in their mind and they're trying to press the player characters into a mold that they've created for them already, rather than being like, I'm going to set up a situation and then whatever you guys do with that situation, however that ends up spiraling out, will end up being the campaign. Alright, session 8. Same day. They haven't moved. It's in the evening. We got our points of orders. Severin decided not to take a cat nap. So we'll probably be taking another point of exhaustion before they rest again, which is not great. Severin, I think, is already... I think he only has 1 point of exhaustion. Because he basically spent all night at the... being interrogated with the crime. And serving as a witness. And then got home in the morning and has had a full day, and now it's nighttime again. But I think they are going to rest. I think they have decided they're going to rest. Whenever they get to land. Yep. Foreshadowing. We didn't do any of this because they're off on the boats. I guess Japheth could have talked to them, but Japheth didn't have a lot of RP conversation. So they set off in their boats. For those of you who are familiar with this prep, it helps if I share the screen, probably. Here we go. Let me just talk about it. There we go. So set off in the boats. So for those of you who are familiar and watched this before, you will notice that I do a scene DC, which is basically I just set a DC for whatever the scene. So whatever you're trying to do in this scene is probably going to be a DC 12. If it's particularly hard, I'll probably add 3 to it and make it a DC 15. If it's particularly easy, I'll probably remove 3 from it and make it a DC 9. So pretty easy to do most of the time. So we have their boats traveling into the harsh sun. They're traveling westward into the sun as it sets. Just a nice little description of everything that's going on. We had Caleb, our cleric, actually did cut their hand and do their religious offering for safe travel, and the fishers did some of the same. Caleb was also able to put their armor back on now that they're out of town. Zarnok clocked the small island to the west, which was, just pointed out, was that suspected home of Lily, the adventure broker's friend, their pen pal that they haven't heard from, that they were looking for at the docks. Did make a perception check and did succeed, and did see the silhouettes moving in and out of the water around the island. And the fishers, he didn't really talk to the fishers about it. They talked to them a little bit later about this, though. When they were trying to figure out, like, oh, what are we going to be facing? Like, oh, well, you know, there could be Sohagen, but probably not. They really don't attack large groups like this, but if you're out by yourself on the water, you know, maybe. It's not really safe to be out on the water by yourself. Which is just a general rule, but for life in general. But also specifically because there be monsters here. They didn't really do any further inspection. They would have, I'd tell them a little bit about, well, you see that they're conversing with the ones that are coming out of the water and see them move inland. So they didn't learn anything about what's going on with the cleric. So is the cleric okay? No, their adventurer friend's not okay. He's being held a prisoner to divine the location of the Aquan Pearl, which is in the player's character's possession, but they do not know it yet. Because they have not opened it. They have not gotten to it yet. So we did our sunset fishing. So I needed to figure out who's in which boat. And all they needed to do was defend the fishers in their catch. And so I have here ghoul swarms. These are basically reskinned raven swarms. So you have this flotilla of seagulls that come in and start trying to get the fish. So the player characters are trying to beat off the seagulls and try to keep the fish safe for their fishing haul. And I spread it out. So this is me. One of the reasons I spread this out is that I'm still trying to grok the new 2024 encounter building rules, because they're so different from the 2014 guidelines as far as how many things to play. Because remember, they're first level, so it was like they wanted me to put in, like, this combat's gonna have 6 creatures in it, like monsters in it, and that's a lot, especially for a first level party, especially when there's only 3 of them. That's a lot. And it's like, I know the math tells me that I can put it in here, but I'm not sure that would work very well. So what I did is I instead let them come in round by round, so at the end of the round more would show up. And then they're on boats, so I was like, oh, if you take damage, you need to do a dex save. Again, the DC is 10, because it's the scene DC, to stay on your feet and not fall in the water as you're kind of thrashing around trying to fight off all these seagulls. We did not have anybody fall in the water, which is good. But I did also kind of forget about this for the first time it happened. And once blood is in the water, there's a 1 in 6 chance at the end of the round a reef shark shows up, as has been the case for the entire campaign, except for one specific instance. They roll extremely well at not rolling 1s, so not a lot of random encounters, not a lot of reinforcements show up. So we went, I think the combat took 4 rounds, maybe actually 5 rounds. They weren't doing, well, the swarms have resistance against everything, because they're swarms. And we did not have one of our big spellcasters there, who could do big AoEs. So they kind of struggled to deal damage. But they did, so no reef shark showed up. Which is alright, because nobody fell in the water, so it wouldn't have been an issue for anybody anyways. But, the fight went fine. I think it was kind of a silly fight, being like you guys are fighting a bunch of seagulls on a boat, which is very funny. But, they were never in a ton of danger. They got hit a few times, but they were never really in real, true mortal danger. So I guess I should probably start relying a little bit more on the 2024 encounter building guidelines. That did seem like an appropriate amount of swarms. If I had thrown 6 swarms at them right off the bat and had them double up on characters, that probably would have been a much more difficult combat. And that wasn't really what I was trying to go for. I was trying to... after the one combat where they really got their noses broken, I've been kind of throwing them some softballs, trying to build up their confidence back on encounters, because they had one encounter, their first combat went not in their favor. And so I'm still trying to like build their confidence back up for the players. But they'll get there, and I think this was a good one to do that. You're the friend making your own stories, basically, and they kind of do the exact thing about creating situations or lore, and NPCs more about building the world and doing stuff in the lore. Yeah, classic world building, right? Very classic world building. You sometimes make situations. We both have our main playable characters, but no dice or stuff like that. Doesn't count as something like no DM campaign, or no DM campaign. Yeah, I mean, of course, if you're just having fun with your friends, which is great, yeah, and you guys are kind of building a world together and stuff, yeah. But if you're not using dice or stuff, I mean, you could argue that if you're just making fiat decisions about stuff, maybe it's not necessarily a game. But that's neither here nor there. I've played games like that before, where basically the DM just kind of makes a decision. I remember we had a very popular game that had a bunch of people. It was a whole bunch of little games, basically nothing but a bunch of one-shots that we would have where we were camping. So the only thing we had on us was a deck of playing cards. We were using playing cards and just kind of like making it up as we went along. Lots of fun. Had a lot of fun with my friends doing that stuff. Made a lot of new friends doing it. Yeah. Does it constitute a game? Maybe not, but if you're having fun, then you're probably doing something right. So keep that in your back pocket. So that was it for the sunset fishing. They got that done. They got the payout. So they got the 5 gold payout, which was kind of considered their cut of the haul. They thought it was a little weird that the captain was giving them the gold then, which I agree was probably, in retrospect, is kind of weird to pay them when they're still on the boats. But my thought as a planner, knowing what was about to happen, be like, well, you guys are probably about to leave, so it makes sense for him to pay you now. And again, the idea being that then they would also sleep out on the boats, and then in the morning they would do another round of fishing and have a similar situation. But I assume that they would not hang around to do that. So, next scene, Strongbox in the mud. So they had some downtime. Then it's basically the sun has fallen behind the horizon. They've got a little bit of daylight left, and some of the fishers have gone skin diving, looking for what they can find down in the water. And so, in that downtime, the fishers encourage the party to go skin diving with them. 2 of the 3 players decided to go skin diving. One of them was like, I'm not getting in the water. Which makes sense. That is the cleric. They have already had bad experiences with the water, and wear medium armor. So they probably don't want to take that off and get into the water and not have armor on. So it makes sense. But there's no sort of like bad thing that can happen here. So there's all sorts of odds and ends that can be found. Let them kind of choose the skill to roll. I think they roll perception. I think both of them. Maybe one rolled investigation. I think they just rolled perception. And whoever rolled the highest is going to find the strong box. So whoever went there and was looking for stuff was going to find some stuff. So since we only had one person go, one person found a pearl oyster worth 11 gold. So was worthwhile. I was really going to think that, really thought the character that was going to go in there, I was really hoping they would find the dreamfish, which is a kind of a psychoactive fish that you can cook up and eat that will give you hallucinations. And then that is the character who has cooking as one of their things. Very dungeon meshy inspired. So I thought they were going to end up getting that, but unfortunately, the way they rolled, I guess I could have by fiat given it to them, but I thought they would appreciate probably having something that was just worth more money at this point. So giving them the pearl oyster that's worth a bit was probably the better move, or at least I thought it was the better move in the moment. So I gave him the pearl oyster. Our other character found the strongbox. So, did not do what I thought they were going to do, which I kind of assumed that when you find something like a strongbox at the bottom of the water, that you would bring it on the boat and then deal with it then. But they were like, no, I'm going to open it underwater. I was like, oh, okay. Very difficult, but sure. Rolled really well. Broke the They busted the rusted lock on it, the padlock. Opened it up, and they found the sealed tarpaulin lining. So it's sort of a sack. Like I said, this has the aquan pearl in it. They have not opened the sack yet. They just grabbed the sack and went back up to the boat, and then kind of immediately forgot about it. Which was very fun. So it's in their possession. They just have no idea about it. So they're going to find... it hasn't gotten wet yet, so they're going to find this fuchsia crystal that surrounds a large pearl. They haven't looked at it yet, though. But it's in their possession, which is very funny. And since they didn't bring it out, and Swain wasn't there, they didn't have to do any of that stuff. So this was all going to be like stuff that kind of keys them into things. Like Ifrit, Swain was going to have to do a difficult charisma save, so instead of a DC 16, it's going to be a DC 19, or they're going to be compelled to bet anything they can think of to get their hands on that pearl. They're willing to bet anything to get it. They feel compelled to do it. And if gambling, Severin has disadvantage, even with the lodestone, to even hold cards or dice without blinking. And with this feeling that the vice is tightening around their chest. Which plays into sort of like the stuff that's going on in their backstories to deal with. But none of that has happened. Swain, the player for Swain, wasn't there. They're on a little holiday, and they didn't pull out the crystal, so there was no gambling or anything, and so nothing happened with Severin. So that's that. So they found that. They found this very important item, and they don't know that they have it yet, which is very funny and very on brand for this player too. To be like, I went down there and got a thing and came back up, and then didn't do anything with that thing. Didn't investigate it at all once I got back on the boat. Okay. Good to know. It's in your pocket. A pufferfish. A pufferfish. yeah, like the pufferfish is toxic as well. Yeah. The dreamfish specifically is a real thing, and it does really actually just give you hallucinations if you eat it. It was funny because when I was thinking about what kind of fish they could find, because I wanted a fish thing for them to be able to capture while they were down there, and not just like salvage when they were under the waves, just kind of skin diving. And I came across that. It was funny because there is a dreamfish in my other campaign that I'm a player in. Like we're dealing with tridents, we're all underwater. There is a separate legitimate dreamfish, which is one of the player characters, I guess, kind of companion, familiar kind of right now, who is just hanging around and very much has mechanics on it in which they sort of like pull memories out of people's minds. So very interesting for it to come up, and I was like, oh well, that's a double dip. I'll go ahead and use that again. So yeah, I basically set up 3 scenes for this, and I've gotten to the point where I realized that I only need about a page and a half, which is pretty much what I got. A page and a half of prep for about a 4-hour session. And in this case, it's 3 different scenes. Because I always think, and that's one of my issues as a DM, that I always think that the player's going to move through things faster than they ever do. So I always over prep. and generally have to push things off for like sometimes weeks. So I'm trying not to do that with this campaign. So I'm really trying to keep it down. Like we looked at session 7. 7 sessions had one scene in it. And I was like, I don't know what's going to happen after that. Is that, you know, is I'm going to have to improvise it, and I'm just going to try to be okay with that. Because I'm not the biggest improviser DM, so I'm trying to be uncomfortable with that and kind of grow that part of my DMing a little bit. And then our third scene, a solitary lantern approaches, which is really just this bit. And then I knew I was going to have to end it because I didn't know what they were going to do. So I had 3 ideas of things that they could go and do in their next session. They could go check out the gold mine stuff, the secret gold mine stuff. They could go deal with the hermit cleric with the Swakin on their island. Or they could just hang out on the boats, do the sunrise fishing, and head back to town. Roleplaying. They could do that if they wanted to. So, one of those 3 things. I knew they were going to do one of them. Is it better than that kind of mushroom? I wouldn't know from personal experience. No idea. The anecdotal research, minimal research I did about it, people's accounts were that they were very intense hallucinations. So I think that could be good or bad, depending on the trip, I suppose. So a solitary lantern approaches. Scene DC 14. They are hanging out, kind of assuming that they will be hanging out at this point into the morning twilight before dawn to do their second bout of fishing before they go back in. There's a bunch of heavy winds and choppy waters. The boats are they're all lashed together, roughly, but they're all kind of like, ooh, on the waters. I didn't roll to see if anybody was seasick. Probably should have, just for fun. But this was kind of a scene that was going to be a little bit more intense. And they pick up a boat with a single lantern pulling into the view, revealing Japheth, which is a character Severin has briefly talked to, just once, on the ferry over to the island. They recognize Severin, but most importantly, they recognize Zarnok. They don't know anything about Zarnok. They just saw them at Gulder. This is supposed to be a Gilder. What? No. Yeah. There you go. Gilder. So, yeah, they're hanging out in the morning. There's a single lantern that kind of pulls into view, revealing Japheth. They recognize Severin, but most importantly, Zarnok. And they only recognize Zarnok, remembering that they had seen them because somebody had given them a broken 7 coin, which is this little puzzle key door opening coin. And he saw him have it in his possession, meaning that he is a guilder. He's with the Thieves Guild. The players haven't quite put that together yet, but they'll get there. They're, like I said, they've been dancing around the periphery of the Thieves Guild stuff. They just haven't really found somebody they can really ask about it in a very direct way, or directly asked anybody about it. So, when he recognizes Gilder, a lot of the people that are on the boats react. They grab, you can see, and kind of describe it to them, you can see people reaching down and grabbing things like gaff hooks and things like that. Like Japheth has recognized this person here, and that they are a Gilder, and that these people who are on the boats are not friends of the Gilders. So there is this sort of like tension that immediately starts. And so I knew that they were going to have to de-escalate the Fishers. They did some good roll RP. They did some good rolls. They got out of it. And being like, oh, well, I don't know anything about them. I just go there to be a bare knuckle boxer or fighter. And so they're like, all right, is that true? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have you go one-on-one with one of our guys. And so they call one of their guys over to have basically a bare knuckle boxing match. And once they are satisfied that, oh, this guy's like a legitimate fighter, so, alright, because his player character is the class fighter, and then eventually call it off, and they're like, alright, you've proved your point, yeah. You've done that. Japheth starts talking to the captain about, hey, we're going to have a change of plans. Instead of going to the oyster farm, which first thing that player characters have heard about it, that they got a whiff of some prospectors who found gold right under Chap's nose. All hush hush. And they think that it's a perfect opportunity if they go right now, like tonight, that they can get in there, they can swoop in, get some of this gold, before the Lord of the Land learns about it and cracks down on it and pretty much is going to take ownership of it because it's on their land. So this is their opportunity to go like right now and go do it. And then that kind of brought us to the end of the session. It's like, what do you guys want to do? Because you guys have basically 3 things you can go do. You can go do the gold stuff, you can go check on the hermit, or you can hang out here and do fishing and head back to town. Not surprisingly, they decided to go chase down the gold. I figured they would, and that's why I felt pretty confident about going ahead and starting building the dungeon they're going to go into for that. Because I figured that they would almost definitely do that. But they could have not, and I could have wasted a bunch of time if they decided that they wanted to go check on the hermit. But the hermit's not going to be a big adventure thing. It's going to be pretty short. Probably going to be a 1-session kind of thing. Whereas this dungeon is probably going to be like a 2-3 session. Like I said, that's kind of my sweet spot. It's about 7 rooms for a dungeon. I like that number. So it runs about 2 to 3 sessions, depending on how fast they kind of get through stuff. Gold it is. Gold is good. Gold is shiny. Gold is expensive. I'm choosing gold. Oh, if they didn't get there, do you know who would take all the gold from the mine? So that was going to be interesting. So it's not a mine. They're under... Japheth is operating off of just some very, very basic information. He's assuming that it's a mine. That all he knows is the prospectors found gold. And they found a source for the gold. They know that. What it is not a mine. What it did is, we're talking about that trap that I'm building earlier that puts the gold flakes on people's skin. That's where they're getting gold from. And yes, could they go out of their way to manipulate that to make money? Maybe. I'm going to trust that my players will not do that, because if so, then we're not playing the game anymore. You guys are just operating this weird money mine. But it's actually not a mine at all. They're assuming that it's a mine. And I'm putting that in front of them. The Japheth thinks it's a mine, but it's not a gold mine at all. But who would get the gold from it? Problem is the prospector's dead. So somebody would run across it eventually. Who that would be, I'm not sure. Somebody would run across it eventually, though. So I don't know. Rexus. Do you have any experience with the OSE, D&D, or any other systems where you just play 5e? Yeah, I've played some old school essentials. I played some old school essentials in a West Marches style campaign with some friends. Yeah, I've played a number of different editions. I've got D&D stuff that's not D&D, World of Darkness stuff, sci-fi stuff. I played a bunch of different stuff. So I primarily am playing 5e 2024 right now, just because it is the easiest to find players for. I would love to get back into a Starfinder game. I truly like Starfinder. I think it's a great system, and I'd love to play more of it. I've only played like 2 games of Starfinder, and I really enjoyed them. I like the way they do the guns and the weapons. I think it's really well designed. Obviously it's not perfect. It's got its own quirks, but I do like the way it's designed and the way that they bring it to it. And I like the way they do the spells and all sorts of stuff. So I'd love to play another Starfinder game. Other favorites of mine: Savage Worlds. Big Savage Worlds fan. harder to find people who play Savage Worlds. I do like that it's one of the nice universal systems, so once you learn how to play Savage Worlds, you can play fantasy, you can play historical, you can play sci-fi, you can play horror, you can play anything you want, because it's a universal role-playing system. It's not tied to any sort of specific genre or theme, so it's really useful to do a whole bunch of different stuff. If you want to play westerns, you can do that, like Deadlands, which is what it came out of. It's a Deadlands role-playing game. Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. But yeah, I do have experience with like Old School Essentials and other sort of OSR stuff. I know you guys can't see it, but I do have Lamentations of the Flame Princess back there, which is one of my favorites. Really hard to find people who play with that unless you find people who only play OSR stuff, which is a very different style of game. But yeah. So, yeah, that was last session. And then, of course, down here I've got some stuff, added stuff. These are just things that help me. This is my prep for improv kind of section. Some inner scene fluff. This is stuff when I think the game's just running a little slow I can throw in. Most of the stuff is still stuff from town, though. They're about to do some overland travel for a minute. So we'll figure that out. I'll have to write up new stuff for the next session. Some NPCs, names, and who they are. Like their ancestry, gender, and then some sort of description about them. Like, this person's thin with dimples. This person's kind of fluffy and a bit of an airhead. This person's thin and charming. This person's muscled and has a braided beard. This person is a bit pudgy, and they have auburn hair to their shoulders. So, just little things that kind of help me when I need an NPC right now. I've got stuff like the noble titles, church titles, because I'm using very specific for this little corner of my world, and so they're trying to use some more diegetic language-like terms for stuff. Like, they've run into a number of Ghazis, which are essentially knights. Talked to Shamas. They haven't talked to anybody else, though. Anybody else that's in the church titles. Just Shamas at this point. I don't think they've talked. They've heard about some bays, but they haven't talked to any bays yet. And one player character has a relationship with a Bano lady. Yeah, that's it. And then some random encounters down here that I can just toss in. I, again, got my swarm of seagulls, which are ravens. Just toss in. And some random treasure they can find. Most of it's not particularly useful. Not generally even worth a lot of money. Most of this stuff actually comes from I have a 2d6 little roll table that I use, or a d66 table if you want to look at it that way. Which is just pocket contents, like stuff you find in people's pockets. So which I made because I always felt like I ran into a situation where the players would ask me like, oh, do they have anything on them? Or they come across a random dead body, or are trying to toss just an unremarkable room. Give me an idea of something that's of some minor amount of coinage that they might be able to find. Sometimes they get really expensive, though. Like this one, they can find at some point a battered travel virginal, which is basically this weird, like, travel harpsichord thing, which I had never seen before. Just looking for, because I knew it was going to be some sort of music instrument, and I didn't want it to be just like a flute or something like that. And that's worth quite a bit. It's worth 65 gold. I don't know. I think, given that description, I'm not even sure they're going to pick it up if they ever come across it. And they probably won't recognize that it's worth that amount of money. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Yeah, that's it. So one of the things that I did want to take, so I asked a couple of my friends some questions, the same people I'm talking about who are the other two sort of primary DMs I play with, Dungeon Masters I play with right now. So I asked them a couple questions earlier in the week, just trying to get an idea. And so I wanted to ask them, what are some things like you wish you had known when you started DMing, or that you had to learn kind of the hard way? Because I was very interested in, because I can know what those things are for me, but I think it's very helpful to find out, other people's experiences and what they come up to it through. So I'll talk about my friend who is the DM for my Sunday game. And so he gave me basically 3 different things. One of the things that he found was very difficult is that there wasn't a lot of advice on how to build a dungeon from scratch. Like how to build the layout of a dungeon from scratch. And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, and they don't really give you a whole lot of... DMG usually in the back section has that like random roll tables for how to build it, for building a random dungeon, but I wouldn't say... Number one, I don't think that those rules are particularly good, or at least the 2014 ones weren't. I don't think I've looked at the 2024 ones to see if they're any good, but the 2014 ones aren't particularly good, and those things always make weird dungeons. They make these weird sprawling dungeons, which are not particularly useful in most contexts. So yeah, that was definitely something that I agreed with, and is that there aren't a lot of rules that tell you how to build the layout of a dungeon, like any sort of guidelines for how to do that. And I was like, that's true. That is weird for a game that has dungeons literally as the first word of its title. Doesn't really give you a lot of advice in how to do that. Now, older editions certainly do. Certainly in your 1 and 2Es, they have very, very specific guidelines to be like, this is how you build a dungeon, and you build these levels, and here's what you put in here, and all that stuff. So for him, he talked about there's not a lot of good guidelines for how to make a layout of a dungeon that's going to be fun to play in, and that there aren't a lot of great stocking rules for what to put in that dungeon. He's like, there are rules, but they're not good. And I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. I think I've gotten to a place where I'm in a place in my Dungeon Master career, if you want to call it that, where I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I have that stuff now. I just don't ever go look at the books for that stuff, because I know the things that I like in the way that I like to build those things, so I don't actually need to go look at an exterior reference like the Dungeon Master's Guide. I think the Dungeon Master's Guide is probably the book I look at in 5e 2024. It's probably the book I look at the least as a reference. Just because I think that, well, I'm on record being like, I don't think the 5e one's particularly good. Oh, you thought the DMG... Well, you're immediately going to be like, you're wrong. No, just kidding. You thought the DMG was kind of decent, at least for solo play. Do you have another way to generate a dungeon yourself? And so what book or source do you use? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't think I've ever used it for that. I have my own situation. Actually, I can pull it up. I can just pull it up real quick. I'm going to drop you guys out so while I go look for it. I think I have my own. I don't think I've put it up anywhere to purchase because it's very much just a me resource. Let me see. I think I've got a dungeon thing. And I think I actually have a video where I go over the solo dungeon. I think I got 2 of these things. Yeah. Alright, we can hop back over. So for I'll answer both of those questions. Let's start with the thing. Let me get back over. Here we go. So this is one of the things, and even I don't reference this that much anymore. I usually have it on hand. I have it printed out, but I don't usually look at it all that often because I've internalized a whole bunch of it. But I have these dungeon creation guide for myself that I've made, which I've given it to some other people, though I don't think I've ever put it up for like download or sale or anything. It's like, why do you run dungeons? what's the goal of this document, and document layout, stuff. Dungeon background and setup. What is the background of the dungeon? Why is it here? In fact, there are really only 3 types of dungeons. There are complexes, natural structures, and vaults. Vaults include prisons and havens, so things that are supposed to keep something within it safe from stuff on the outside, or works as a prison, it's supposed to keep the outside safe from something on the inside. They're effectively the same thing, it's just kind of which direction do the traps point, and stuff like that. A complex is any place where a creature's home or workplace. Fortresses, mines, settlements, ships. And that includes things that are like ruined, obviously. And then natural structures, organic passages, caves. I'll do point crawls where I'll consider things like dense jungles as dungeons. Make a little point crawl thing and kind of use the dungeon framework to build an adventure like that. I have a little dungeon creator thing. Which just kind of looks at, what are the type of creatures who made this thing? Aberrations, celestials, dragons, elementals, fays, fiends, giants, humanoids, monstrosities, plants, undead, none or unknown. That includes usually natural structures. In this example, I put down a cave system or inside a space whale. Some questions to ask myself, the purpose of it, what is it? There's what the dungeon was created as, and then what it's actually being used as by the occupants, which are the inhabitants, which may or may not be the creators. So you might have like an old temple that's being co-opted by a Gnoll warband or something like that they're using as a hideout. So it kind of already gives you like 2 layers of things, which is really helpful. The dungeon inhabitants, similar stuff. What happened to the creators? Are they going to find out about it? Is that important? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the players care, sometimes they don't. And the condition of the dungeon, which is a thing that I don't think comes up very often in most things that I see talk about dungeons, and be like, is it in pristine condition? Good condition, okay condition, disrepair, or ruined. Or it could be uneven, where like each individual chamber is different. Has different sort of wear on it. I like this dungeon condition because what it tells me is when I use that HOT framework, the hazards, obstacles, tricks, or traps, how many of them are going to be like functioning traps, and how many of them are going to be just like hazards of this place kind of falling apart, or were traps, but now the trap's not working correctly, and now it's just chaos. You like that. You like that it makes logical sense. The 3 types you went over, yeah. A haven and prison type makes the sense of traps that they would have. Didn't think of it like that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's... I can't even remember when I first came across the discussion of that. It might have been like a gnome stew thing from who knows how long. That website's been around for a long time. So it could be like 10 plus years old at this point that I referenced that. But yeah, I mean, dungeons are just, there's just really 3 archetypes. It's like, it's either a place where people live and work, which includes ruins, or was constructed in that manner. It is something that's a vault or a prison, or it's just a natural structure. That's kind of the 3 archetypes that all dungeons kind of fall into. And a lot of dungeons are multiples of the, like, there are a lot of, like a classic example is dwarven ruins that also open up into like Underdark, which would be sort of a natural area. So you can have more than one in the same dungeon, where you have, oh, well, the denizens of the Underdark have broken into this Mines of Moria kind of thing, where they've broken into this dwarven complex and killed everybody in it or whatever. And that's why you're going through it. Some dungeon setup. And then the the dungeon chambers and stocking, which is probably the thing that I use the most. Talk a little bit about 5-room dungeon design. Really great for that stuff. But I think Bonus Action had a video not that long ago about the 5-room dungeon, using it for prep and what he liked about it and what he didn't. But he's only looked at it at a glance. I've run a fair number of 5-room dungeons. They're good, but they are like one-session things, which is hard to use as like a campaign framework where it's just a dungeon of the week kind of situation. That's why I like that about 7 rooms, because that's, in my experience, the way that I build dungeons is 7 good rooms or scenes in a dungeon is enough of an adventure that lasts for about 2 to 3 sessions. Sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit shorter, but I don't think they'll ever get through. I've ever found players that would get through it in 1 session. Maybe if they, I think it would be possible if you did everything absolutely right and you didn't waste any time and you went specifically to get whatever you were in the dungeon for and then immediately left. But the likelihood that that happens is functionally 0 when you're playing D&D. Creating a simple dungeon. How big should the dungeon be? That's where I talk about like about 2 to 3 sessions of a standard gaming session. Creating mega dungeons. And then just basic dungeon chamber types. I actually like to take a list like this and roll twice on it, like roll 2 d20s and then try to combine them. So I might have like a crypt and storage. And well, maybe that's not a good example. A crypt is literally just storage for dead bodies. Maybe like a crypt and let's say the bath, latrine, medical area. So maybe there's like the crypt, and then this dungeon chamber is actually some sort of like preparation of the dead room. So it's where they do like mummification or something like that. So you've got like a lot of canoptic jars and stuff like that, yeah. And build stuff like that. Oh, there's a type of dungeon you want to make, which is essentially a pocket dimension space made probably by a wizard. When in doubt, wizard made it. Basically, the rooms change and you have to find your way out and hope. You survive by the time and you find a way out. Oh, yeah. Anytime I hear somebody bring up stuff like that, it always makes me think there's a very specific PAX game of Acquisitions Incorporated, where they're in what is essentially an Acquisitions Incorporated headquarters, where the rooms are written down. I think Chris Perkins literally writes them down on index cards and they move around as they do stuff. Like the parts of the headquarters move around and very similar. So it always makes me think about that. How you do that without the players necessarily knowing, if you don't think they should know. It made sense for the Acquisitions Incorporated people to know what was in their own headquarters, so he just had it out on the table in front of them. But you'd need like a full like side table or something to keep moving those things around. But I do like the index card method of that. I'm not sure how long would be fun to play in it as a player. That would be my only hesitation with something like that. Be like, how many? Like 1 session, probably fine. 2, 3, 4, 5. Who knows how many sessions after that? Probably gets. I think that is. I like it. I think it's, but I do think it is a gimmicky thing. Like it's a thing that you really can overstay its welcome if you're not careful about it. But yeah, and fun idea though, and yeah, I think it's definitely something you can pull off. I think it will be a lot of work. So yeah, I have these dungeon chamber types, which I think this is very similar to what's actually just in the 5e, the 2014-2024 DMG. I think it's very similar dungeon chamber types roll table. I don't think it's exactly the same, but it's somewhat similar. And yeah, the dungeon chamber purposes are generic in nature. Yep. Talk about using dungeon chamber, dungeon room DCs, which you've seen me, is what I was calling the scene DCs. I just do 1 per room. That means that there are hard rooms and there are easy rooms. And then you can adjust that by plus or minus 3 to make it a little bit harder or a little bit easier. And it just makes my notes a lot simpler when I'm just, as a reference, where I can just be like, hey, this is the dungeon room. It's DC 13. Okay. Then I don't need to like put a bunch of notes for me. Okay, well the trap is this, but the DC is this if they try to do investigation. But then the DC is this if they try to do perception or whatever. So it's just like everything's just the same. And then I can modify that if I want it to be harder or easier based off of what they're trying to do. Some roll tables for the size of chambers. Honestly not that important because I don't play with a grid very often. And really all I need to know is like, can they get across it in one movement? Can they get across it if they dash? And double their movement and stuff like that. And let's see. And this is probably my favorite thing. It's probably the thing that I came up with, and I came up with it. I made a slight change to something that has existed for decades, which is the 1d6 stocking roll, which comes from the basic set. So that's what, 82? 1982? Before it was born. So, yay. It's old. But I've co-opted it slightly and changed it a little bit to better suit my things, my needs. So essentially I roll 2d6. And this is how I change it. And then I take the separate results and combine them together. So let's say I rolled a 3 and a 6 for this room. Well, this room, that means there's going to be some sort of hazard, obstacle, trick, or trap in it. And there's going to be a creature. And a treasure. And I like this framework. It takes a lot of the kind of thinking out of it for me. And then based off of whatever ends up in the dungeon is where I decide where, you know, maybe like the big bad evil guy is going to be, maybe where the villain is. And then, of course, these are all tools and they're not ironclad. So if I decide, if I get to a point where I'm like, oh, well, this is like, I did that with this dungeon I'm building. That's what I was thinking of. If I get to a position like, oh, well, there's going to be, like, the commander's suite. Obviously, that's going to have some sort of, like, pretty straightforward combat. That's probably where the big boss monster is going to be. But I ended up not rolling that when I was rolling the dungeon chamber contents. So I just swapped them. Very easy. So, yeah. I just put those together. Now, you might be asking, what happens if you roll the same thing? What if I roll 2 1s? I roll snake eyes. Great. It's the emptiest room that's ever been empty. It's almost suspiciously empty. And that's when you can start looking at things and being like, oh, what does that mean? Maybe I can provide some more context for it. Maybe there's something of interest, something they'll for them to interact with in this space. So it's not really going to be of anything of particular import, or maybe it's going to give them a clue to something that's coming up. And then you'll notice that about 50% have treasure in them. So three of the 6 results have treasure in them. And if I roll something that has more, if I get double treasure, that means that there's specifically a magic item in that room. And that's how I've co-opted that. Just be like, yeah. So this is definitely older because I changed this again. Yeah, rolling doubles, the room also contains treasure. That is not true anymore. It took me, I went through a few versions of these dungeon chamber contents things, but like I said, it's based off of the old, I think I was looking at the Moldvay rules, basic rules, that have a D6 stocking, and I was like, I like this, but it doesn't quite work for what I wanted to, so I changed it up a little bit. But it is probably, this 2D6 table for dungeon chamber contents is probably one of, I think, probably one of the best things that I've ever made as a dungeon master, because I think it's simple, it's succinct, it does what it's supposed to do. And I've just basically not had any bad results with it. It works really well. Good job, me. I did it. So yeah, and then I have some stuff for hazards and obstacles, some stuff for traps, trap triggers, resets, make that up, normal monsters, which are will show up in chambers or wandering monsters, and then some harder combats that show up only in chambers that you'll never find just wandering around. Then I have my little section about why I don't include puzzles. This is why I don't include puzzles, because I think they're silly. But you could just, that would be one of your hazard, obstacles, tricks, or traps. You could just, instead of doing like a trick or something, you'd just be like, I put a puzzle there. The pocket contents table that I talked about, these are all just stuff about putting treasure in. And then some dungeon dressing, which is D20. This has changed. This document was last updated like 2 years ago, so it needs to be redone a little bit. Oh, you meant mostly for solo, for changing the rooms around. I gotcha. And if you don't feel like it anymore, you just eventually escape. yeah. If you're making it for yourself, then that's fine. Yeah, because you're gonna want that randomness of not knowing what's around the bend. You like the idea of having basically a 50% chance that every room has treasure in it? Yes. Makes it very easy to get treasure. Very true, yeah. Since we're on the treasure thing, we can just take a look at it. The thing is that I actually give out quite a bit of treasure. It's just not worth anything. They're very small monetary amounts of treasure. So they find treasure my players like doing the skin diving, you'll find treasure pretty often. But it's like worth 11 gold. It's not a lot of money. So it's a small stream of treasure, but it's a very common one. And you still only have a 1 in 6 chance of getting a magic item. Actually, no, it's less than that. You have a like a point and like a 3% chance of getting a magic item. Whatever. Well, no, that's not true. It's not true. It's higher than that. So you've got, I guess, a 25% chance. I don't know how that math works out exactly. There is a likelihood. Generally, what I come across is that usually in every dungeon I make, if I make it like a 7-chamber dungeon, which is what I usually do, they'll get about 1 magic item, maybe 2 magic items, and that includes everything from healing potions all the way up to like artifact level. So they'll come across stuff. It's just they constantly come across treasure. It's just not like big hordes of treasure. It's just a small, steady stream of stuff they can find. And generally, it's not coinage. I mean, if you've watched the solo RPG stuff, you've seen all these different, a more recent and probably a better setup idea of what these treasure tables are. Then like I said, we have some dungeon dressing just to kind of like put some stuff in there. It's got fun stuff: unexpected odor, benign fungus, mold, ooze, or slime, half-finished board or card game, a 1d6 dungeon, ally, pet, trader, visitor, prisoner, slave. Just an NPC you can run across. A clothing pile, graffiti, a random key. There's a 10% chance that it'll fit some lock in the dungeon, or maybe it's just something else. Maybe they'll never find out what that is, what that key goes to. Maybe. It's random. Yeah, mapping it and putting it all together. I've got stuff for entrances, 10 tips for better dungeon layouts, dungeon chamber list items. But yeah, this is usually the document I go to if I ever need to go to it, which is not that common anymore, because I know most of the stuff by memory. Sometimes I'll come in for like specific tables to roll on, do stuff like that. Yeah, here's an example of one. Ruined Armory, DC 11. You enter a musty 40 by 30 foot ruined armory. Broken spears and other remnants of arms and armor litter the floor amongst broken stone. In the hall behind, you can hear the sound of the complex settling, whining as it shifts. The center of the ruined armory is blocked by rubble from the half-collapsed ceiling. Searching the rubble, you feel the tiniest of moving airflow, and with light, you can peer through a crack in the rubble to spot a reinforced wooden door behind the barrier of collapsed ceiling. The door appears barred from this side. What do you do? So this is clearly a room that's just got an obstacle in it. hey, if you want to get through here, there's a bunch of rubble that's clearing the way. You definitely see that there is a door on the other side, so you can either leave the chamber and see if you can find the doorway into the other side, or you can spend a whole bunch of time moving rubble around to try to clear space for maybe a small character in your party to scrabble through and see if they can find something in the other half of the room. What I always struggle with is, how do you do all of that? Say you get into a chamber, you scroll around and roll for each table to find out what's in it. And roll for each of them. Yeah, again, this document specifically is for me making it, as a DM, making a dungeon for somebody else to run in. Generally, so this is all like prep work stuff that I'm doing. So I'm generally not rolling on these tables individually, like while I'm playing. This is a at-home resource. This is a prep resource, not a play resource. If you roll an empty room, does that indicate that you don't have to roll the other tables because it's empty? Like, what's the structure? Yeah. So yeah, if the room's empty, stocking comes at the back end. So you've already done all the other stuff in the room. You've probably done dungeon dressing. You know what the purpose of the room is, and you have an idea of kind of like general stuff that's in the room. But empty room in this case means there's not really anything for them to particularly interact with. There's not going to be some sort of obstacle that they need to overcome. There's not going to be monsters for them to fight. There's not going to be any notable loot that they can get. There might be some random stuff, like if it was, let's say, a larder or something like that, and that was the room. It's like, yeah, maybe you could find, if you sifted through all the old pots and crocks and stuff like that, you might be able to find something that you could add to like your rations. It constitutes like some extra rations or something like that, but probably unlikely. But no notable loot. So yeah, an empty room just kind of ends up being empty. And then if you roll empty, you roll snake eyes, then you're like, it's suspiciously empty. Suspicious as in, like, it's weird. Not suspicious like you want them to waste a bunch of time in this room looking for hidden doors or something like that. Which, you could throw a hidden door in there if you wanted to. And maybe that's the key off, is that nothing's in there. And so that's why it kind of piques their interest, and they're more likely to look for something like a hidden door. Potentially do that. Then I make a wandering monsters list at the end, just to they screw up and run around a bunch of stuff. Stuff for just like corridors, elevation changes, doors, door types, the status of the door. Is because this is something that comes up in a lot of old school OSR kind of stuff. Is door play is a lot more important than it is in contemporary D&D, where you're like, hey, sometimes you just come across a door and it's like broken, or it's barred, or it's just stuck, like it's swelled and you can't get it open, and just getting it open makes a whole bunch of noise, so chance things are going to discover you're in the dungeon and come a-running. Not stuff that kind of comes up in contemporary 5e style dungeon crawls. But yeah, this is my dungeon creation document. Like I said, it's in need of an update. It's 22 pages. So it's me just kind of like word vomiting out stuff in a way that I think somebody else could use this document. Is the way that I wrote it. So if I was just writing it for my own edification, it would be much shorter. There's a lot of stuff that I know that I don't need to explain to myself. And then when you use this one, which is, I believe I have a video going over this, but we can take a look at it real quick. So this is my solo or improvised dungeon delving reference. So if you watch me do the Ruined City stuff, running through that, you'll be familiar with this, because I'll use this to go through that. So you have my own hint there. Hey, play fast, roll twice on each table, and take whichever result feels appropriate, or combine them for something weirder. Again, like roll twice on the tables and smash them together. This is my old Questo-matic. I picked it up from somewhere. I think it wasn't even a reference to TTRPG. I think it was a reference to somebody trying to talk about making an MMORPG. And being like, oh, this, and they called it Questomatic, and I liked the name, so I just stuck the name with it. It's basically, hey, you just need to come up with a simple quest line. You can do it this way. You have a patron who wants you to do something to some sort of object or person or whatever. Object as in grammatical object. And you might have some sort of timer attached to that. So actions, aid, help, betray, misbehave, bribe, buy, recruit, change, transform, defend, destroy, slay, destroy, slay, stop, bribe, and recruiting, new faction, and then objects down here are like the PC or the party or the belief or doctrine, ordinary, hazard, or obstacle, extraordinary, hazard, or obstacle. Extraordinary in this context means something weird, something not natural, something probably weirdly magical, doing stuff like that. And then a timer like, hey, you need to complete this before something happens, or it's only available, you have to complete it during this small window of time, or you need to be able to hold the position or something until X happens. Like, hey, you need to, and this is more of an adventure thing, you're like, hey, you need to, very sort of like military wise, like you need to hold this position against the enemies and just endure them until reinforcements arrive, kind of stuff, for hold until X. You have to complete it after something else happens, so there's some sort of prerequisite that has to happen first. 11, you include some sort of plot twist or reveal. 12, roll twice and combine, which makes it can make some very weird plots. And dungeon size, or the number of scenes or rooms you want for your dungeon. Your methods may vary. Generally, the rule of thumb is that a scene or encounter or something takes about 45 minutes of table time. Obviously, if you're running it by yourself, it usually takes a little bit less time, but generally, like if you're going to run a combat or something like that, it takes about 45 minutes, unfortunately, depending on how many people you have involved and how many creatures are in the combat. So that gives you an idea for, well, if I want to play for an hour and a half, okay, I need like 2 scenes. That's it. Maybe 3 scenes if I'm running by myself. Go through that stuff. Dungeon structure is very similar, so a lot of this stuff is cribbed from that other document that we already went over. But this is a newer one because I'm already using the term like hot, because I got tired of saying hazard, obstacle, trick, or trap so many times. It just went, it's hot. This dungeon room is hot. Oh, the solo improvised dungeon reference looks cool. Thanks. You like the idea of an improvised or rolled quest? Yeah, comes up sometimes. Yeah, just be like, I don't know, you're going on a quest for this. I know that Professor DM had a table like this when he was running sort of like a street rats gang kind of game, where he had a very similar sort of structure where he was just like, oh, this faction wants you to do something to this faction. Had a very similar thing, so you could just kind of like make it adventure of the week kind of style. And then we have our solo improvised dungeon delving steps. Alright, so nice little 6 steps that'll get you to dungeon delving by yourself. So if you are interested in doing that sort of play. So step 1, create a dungeon entry or exit doorway and the first room of your dungeon. You're going to want to record the room numbers for rooms beyond room exits. Yep. Or else you're going to lose track of where things are. When you're moving between any 2 rooms, roll a random encounter check to see if you run into something while you're moving between rooms. During your corridors, passageways, or whatever, however you're getting from one way to another. Also works if you wanted to make it like a ruined city. This is like stuff you might run across while you're just traveling the streets of a ruined city. I use a D12 to do random encounter checks. If you've watched solo RPG stuff that I do, you've seen this before. On a 1, that's an encounter, usually combat, not always. 2 through 11, nothing. And on 12, some sort of like aside or dressing. That's one of the things, like when we're looking back at the prep, that inner scene fluff that I have is just like, here's just like a little thing. It would be that kind of stuff. Step number 4, detail your new dungeon room and resolve whatever's in that dungeon room. For it's, your hazard, obstacle, trick or trap, your combat encounter if you have that. If you find any treasure, look for that stuff in there. Step 5, repeat steps 2 through 4 to fill the dungeon as you delve. And whenever you're done delving, you can turn around and just head back out. And number 6, when the dungeon room number target is met, create a dungeon's time exit in a yet unexplored room. So yeah, one of the things that I think is really important for solo play, for solo dungeon delving with something like this, is you want to realize right up here that dungeon size. How big do you want the dungeon to be? How often do you want? How much time do you want to spend in here? Like I said, for me, 7 rooms is about my sweet spot. So I really like that. So I know once I get to get close to that 7th room that I'm exploring, I'm like, okay, this is where the climax of the dungeon is going to be. This is where the big bad guy is going to be. Once I'm in like room, in a 5 or something like that, I start thinking about that, because most of these rooms have like passageways that are going to split off for other unexplored things. So I'll try to figure out what those are, and then that'll give me an idea of where to put sort of like the climactic room. And then you do it. That's it. Super easy. But yeah. Like a bunch of this stuff it said was pulled from the other document. So I have a dungeon room scene template, room number. It just tells me like, hey, this is how I write the notes. The room number, size of the room, the originator or inhabitant theme that I want in the room. Because sometimes I'll be like, oh, well, I want factions. So maybe there's, we did this with the solo RPG Ruin City Crawl. Oh, I wanted, like, gnolls, and I wanted the foreign faction, and I think there were orcs in there as well that I very rarely rolled on. So I'm like, oh, well, one of those 3 will show up in a room. That'll be the thing. They might not necessarily be in that room, but they might have some evidence that this is in their, like, domain or domain. The room type, the room DC. Under that, we have any sort of dressing that I want to put in the room and the contents of the room. And then doorways and secrets or / exits that are either secret doors into passages or exits out of the dungeon. Because I like to put at least 2, if not more, exits into a dungeon. So there are different ways. It's not like you go one way and then you have to walk out the other way. There's usually like 2, maybe sometimes 3. You could do more if you were doing a bigger dungeon. Usually 2, sometimes 3 is a good number. It also means like if we talk about the trap that I was making with the pillars that are the statues with their golden beam eyes. Like I said, there's another entrance into the dungeon, so you never have to go through that room. If the players decide like, we suck at this room, we can't figure out the puzzle, we don't know how to get through it, there's totally other ways that you can get in and into the dungeon and see everything else that's in the dungeon, not have to deal with that room if you don't want to. Yeah, appreciate you going through it. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, how are you? But yeah, I mean, that's just sort of the solo dungeon reference that I use when I'm trying to do it by myself. Push bonus tables for creatures, maybe dressing for wilderness. Yeah, miscellany. This is just other stuff you might trip on. Yeah, you're catching the very end. Is what you're catching. We're probably about to wrap this up. So, bonus tables for creatures. These are questions I have for me that I think maybe I'd include if I want to build this out to have it as a full standalone resource. Like I have a, I'm not gonna pull it out, but in my Dungeon Master's little binder, I have a D100 table of just random NPCs. It's not like names and affix for them, but generally it's just like a D100 job list. Like what does this person do? Who is this person? So you have stuff that's like, oh, they're an adventurer, or they're a cheesemonger, or all sorts of random stuff for just random people you can run into. But yeah, that's everything for Dungeon. I don't think I have any other. Well, I'll do a quick look and see if I got something else, since we've been talking about making dungeons in the layout. Because that's what my friend said he was struggling with. He wished there were more rules around. Also included adjudicating complex rule interactions. Yeah, and unfortunately I just don't think that, unless you're playing something that's like a very crunchy game, like maybe like a Pathfinder kind of game, where rules are really, really explicit, you're always going to have to adjudicate weird situations. Unfortunately, that's just something you learn. Though I do agree that I'm not sure that anything like the DMG, like a Dungeon Master's Guide, I think some are better at it than others, about giving you some guidelines for adjudicating rules, interactions, or weird things that happen in the game. I think I'm trying to remember, because again, this is not a section that I look at very often, having run a lot of games and played in a lot of D&D. Trying to... I think 5e's got an okay section on advice for adjudicating rules and rule interactions. I think it's mostly... the general criteria is like, try to be fair, try to be consistent. And that's pretty much it. And when in doubt, you know, fall on the side of your players. But it's okay to tell your players no, too. In fact, you're gonna... that's a necessity. You're gonna have to tell your players no, because they will come up with all sorts of weird and bizarre and random things that don't make any sense. And so sometimes you just have to be like, that... the answer is no. It's not going to work. That is not going to do what you want it to do. Oftentimes, I feel like when you find... specifically when you have players who are trying to do weird stuff, or asking very bizarre questions, it's the easiest thing to do is just ask them and be like, what are you trying to accomplish? Because once I know what you're trying to accomplish, then I can help you figure out if that's possible and how we get there. Yeah. You're right. It is something you have to grow with. Tackle it as it comes and be creative. That's... yeah. Yeah, it's... unless you're playing a game that has a rules book that's a thick, meaty tome, where they put in every single potential rules interaction that ever consists. It's just part of the job. You just gotta do it if you're gonna run games. So help me if I hear thermonuclear dynamics in the game again. Yeah, it is... it's not full reality, right? It's not full reality. Exactly. And I think coming out of 3rd edition does have a good framework that I think you can use in most games that I use in a lot of games, but I don't think I ever talk about very often. Is that specific trumps general. So if you have a very specific instance of something that's interacting with a just standard general rule, it's likely that the specific thing in this context is the thing that you should be like, that's probably the right thing. Because the thing that's more specific is the thing that's probably closest to taking the current situation into account, rather than the general broad ruling. So yeah, that's very helpful. And sort of the last thing that my friend had said is they were worried about having a unique storyline and it's bogging down creative flow. This idea, and I think that's definitely something, especially younger Dungeon Masters, Game Masters who are newer to the hobby get really tied down into, thinking like, oh, well, everything has to be original. And the truth is, it's like, nah, not really. There's the good old, I can't remember who it is off the top of my head. It is a old D&D designer. I can't remember who it is, though. Anyway, somebody who's been in the space for many generations, many editions, has a dungeon that they have that's like 9 rooms or something like that. It's like a 3x3 grid dungeon. So there's like 3 columns of, I think there's 3 on each side, and then there's like 1 central area, and then like 1 chamber at the top and 1 chamber at the bottom, maybe. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think like that. Anyways, he has this one dungeon. He's like, yeah, I've run this dungeon like 40 plus times, and many times for the same players, and they have never realized it's the same dungeon that I just use over and over again. Again, he's not saying that he always uses that dungeon, but he was saying that it's like, I use this dungeon a lot. Like, enough. Like, definitely in probably every game that or campaign that he's run. Be like, and the truth is that your players just aren't paying that close of attention to stuff. They're definitely not nearly as close to attention as you are to stuff. So, there is that sort of thing. So, you don't really need to think too much about stuff being very original. You don't need to be very original. In fact, most things are not original in the world. Most things are some sort of riff off of something else that already existed. So, keep that in context. It was interesting, and I do think I want to talk about another friend who answered some questions like these that I talked to, and they had a similar thing. Actually, let's just go ahead and do that. Where is it? Yeah. They thought the thing they struggled with being a new Dungeon Master or Game Master kind of coming into the hobby, especially in that sort of 5e time frame, being like, they found it difficult that D&D didn't give them a lot of narrative framework help. Like, how do I create a fulfilling story arc? How do I create a fulfilling story for an adventure? Stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, I guess that is true. And I think about that, and I think about the first one talking about not having this this unwarranted feeling that they needed to make everything unique and have a unique story and have that sort of stuff. And I was like, I guess that's true. And I think that that's just maybe a generational difference in playing the game, is that I almost never think about that stuff. Like, at all. And I think some of that's experience comes down to experience, having done it for longer. But I think when I think about older editions of the game, and those Dungeon Master guides and published adventures and things of that nature, and be like, yeah, there's not really... Yeah, it's just not... That's not a consideration. It is a game, first and foremost, and not a story. And that kind of has always been the approach of it. So it is very interesting to see people who are coming into the game more recently, which I think pulls in a totally different audience than the game did previously, who are not necessarily not as game focused, but are more the story focused. And it's like, that's very interesting. It's just something that came up. I don't really have any particularly good things as to how to learn that stuff, or if it's even useful. I think that can kind of screw you down to the ground a little too firmly if you have this pressure on top of you. It's like, in addition to just running the game and doing all that stuff, you still have to create this very fanciful, very fulfilling story that you have to write, and somehow keep the chuckleheads who are at your table from screwing that thing up. And I think that's where you get into... I think that's where those points on the map cross, is when you start to get into things like the D&D horror stories and stuff like that, where or DMs that are upset that, like, players aren't taking my story seriously, they don't take my world seriously, or they're just goofing around, or sort of stuff. It's like, well, yeah, because you're putting all this emphasis on a story that you kind of already made, the whole like, and then of course the rejoinder, the platitude is like, go write a book, right? Go write a book instead. It's like, which I'm not sure is helpful advice, but it does have a kernel of truth in it, in that, yeah, I mean, it's up to everybody else at the table to kind of make the story, and that's always kind of been my position as sort of a dungeon master or game master, is like, I'm here to put situations in front of you. What you guys decide to do with those situations and where you decide to go from there is kind of up to you. And the story's going to be, I want the story to spring from the play rather than making the play adhere to the story that I've already made. That's why in the current campaign I'm running, that you know, I have a player who feels like that, you know, there's no reason for the group to be together. What is the thing that binds us all together? And or they feel like the play is unstructured, like they don't know what to do or where to go. And I'm like, I'm just waiting for you guys to latch on to something. And as soon as you guys latch on to something, I'll know where to push the story. But until you guys show me what you're interested in, like in the game while we're playing, I hesitate, because this is supposed to be a very player-forward campaign, to just throw stuff at you, to push you in any sort of specific direction. I want you guys to figure out what you want to do first. So yeah, it's very... and so we're having, I wouldn't say friction, but we are at sort of like an impasse where it's like, well, I'm not going to... And that was sort of the conversation we had, not yesterday, but the last week after the session. It was like, oh, I'm just gonna have to start doing a more plot driven. That's fine. It's fine. I just want everybody to be on the same page that we're doing that before I start doing that. At the moment I start hearing another DM refer to it as their story, it's already kind of a red flag. The story is not just the DM's domain. Correct. Yeah, I think that's true. In fact, I think I personally, as DM, have the least to do with the story. I'm like, I write the introduction. You guys make the story. I'm just writing the introduction. I write the like, what is essentially the scene directions, stage directions for a script. You guys write the script. I just write the stage directions. I just say, this is where you're at, and this is what's going on. So, but whatever you guys do is your guys' domain. And then I just put the next scene in front of you. But yeah, very similar. Another friend said that one of the things that was really hard for them to grok, and I think that they still struggle with it some, is that combat is difficult to understand. And they had problems with the CR system. Who doesn't? And wish that there was more help and tips for playing monsters, both as like tactics for combat, as well as sort of how to roleplay them outside of combat. Not necessarily like the ecology, which is very, very... There's a ton of that in especially older editions, but necessarily like, what do they sound like? How do they carry themselves? What do they care about? Those sorts of things. And I agree. I don't think there's a ton of that. I think, and when I was talking to them about it, I was like, I think that feels more like the reason that that's blank, at least in my opinion, is because that is... They want that to be more of a setting decision rather than a rules of the game decision. And the same reason that, like, Kinder and Hobbits and, like, the... which setting is that? That's, the Dino Riders. That's Eberron? Eberron with the halflings or dinosaur riders and, like, plains people. Like, those are all three very distinct flavors of halfling. And so I can understand, like, as something like the Player's Handbook or Monster Manual not wanting to be like, this is the only interpretation. This is the specific interpretation of whatever this monster is, rather than instead of leaving it a little bit more open for something like a setting guide to do that sort of work. But I can understand, like, as a new Dungeon Master who probably doesn't have a setting guide, you probably just have the Dungeon Master Guide and the Monster Manual to go off of. Like, having something would be helpful. You feel like you never know how to play the monsters. I can understand that. You agree with that. You struggle with the power dynamic of the bad guys want to win, and they are smart, versus the players need to have fun, and by proxy the DM too. Yeah, I think it's helpful to remember that even smart people make dumb decisions. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? That everybody's going to have blind spots, even smart enemies they're going to have, and the players are really good at finding those blind spots sometimes. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're not creative and they don't come up with that stuff. And you're like, it's difficult to play a game in which it feels like the bad guy is always outsmarting the good guys. I think it's helpful to try to remember in the situation is that unless you are going out of your way to have a bad guy that's using something like an arcane eye or something to actually legitimately, or some sort of divination to spy on the player characters, they have no idea what the player characters are up to at any point. Or they send legitimate people out to spy on them, and then the player characters can interact with those people and learn about what the bad guys are doing. But yeah, it is difficult, especially when you're playing with intelligent monsters, to have the players outthink them in a clever way. Sometimes it's really easy. Sometimes you have players that will just do that. And sometimes you have players, a whole group of players that won't ever do that. And then you start to like reframe your thinking. Okay, so the bad guy's always smart. So then the bad guy needs to have a pretty big weakness in some way. Some sort of mismanaged. Like maybe they're just not good at combat. So they will always avoid trying to get into combat with the player characters. So anytime that the player characters show up, their primary thing is like they're trying to get out of that scene. So they have any magic. All their magic is for like escape. They have expeditious retreat. They have fly. They have blink. They have dimension door. They have teleport. And the players are instead often just chasing the bad guy, trying to catch them. And then your bad guy seems clever because they always seem like they're one step ahead, and they're always just slipping through their fingers, which can be fun. And that's a bad guy who feels smart but doesn't feel like insurmountable as a faction or a bad guy, by giving them a very specific kind of weakness, which is like they're just not good in combat. They're just like a dude maybe who's just smart and clever. But yeah, I can definitely see wanting some information on how to play the monsters is really helpful. I think we're starting to see more products that come out, and I think Skull and Crown maybe does this, where each monster just has like a D6 chart as to what they do on their turn, which I think is really helpful, having stuff like that. So you don't necessarily have to think about them, like you kind of know what they're gonna do, because it's literally like hard baked into the stat block, which I think is really a very interesting way to go about it. And like with any other sort of Dungeon Master or Game Master tool, just because it is there doesn't mean that you have to use it. So you could decide to not roll on that chart if you wanted to. You can always have things, which I think dovetails very nicely into something that I often see, but I don't talk about it very often, and I don't think a lot of people talk about it very often, is that things like, people don't like things like legendary resistances or legendary actions or layer actions or stuff like that, and be like, oh well, it's, the monster has 3 attacks on their turn as their attack action or whatever. There's this kind of a unspoken, I'm going to say, fallacy, kind of, in running game that's kind of subsists around primarily Dungeons and Dragons, but it happens in a lot of TTRPGs, which people assume, and the way that's written kind of leads you to make this intuition happen, that PCs and monsters are the same. And that's just not true. The PCs have an entire book dedicated to what they can do. The monsters, each individual monster gets, what, maybe a page? And there's a whole bunch of them. But the important thing is that the rules of the game are there to bind what the players can do, not necessarily what the Dungeon Master can do. So you can just have, like, instead of being like, oh well this monster has multi-attack, and so when they attack they actually make 3 attacks. Instead of doing that, you can just be like, they just take 3 attack actions. They can just take 3 attack actions. There's no reason they can't. I'm making up the game. I'm in charge of the rules. If I want them to, they're stunned or whatever, or they lose their action on their turn or whatever it is, I can just be like, they lose 1 of their attacks, rather than just completely locking them out of a fight just because of that, but still make it feel like the player who casts whatever spell or put whatever effect on them is still did something of, like, pretty substantial. They took away 1 of their 3 attacks on all subsequent turns without it being like, oh well, now my monster's stunned and now it just sits here. Like, there's nothing in the game rules that's like the monsters have to play by the rules. You are in charge of the monsters and you're in charge of the rules, so you just make them up. You can just change them. You don't have to have monsters. Well, and you see this a lot of times in the stat blocks already with things like multi-attack, or things like flyby. Flyby is a good example. So you have a monster that is trying to fulfill this narrative fantasy in which they fly out of the sky and do a strafe and just snap a person and fly back off. And they get to do that without provoking opportunity attacks. Why? Because they just have a thing that says they don't take opportunity attacks when they do this. That's literally just the Dungeon Master being like, yeah, no. That's the game designers being like, yeah, but they should just be able to fly off instead of every time they attack having to take an opportunity attack, at least 1 opportunity attack. So there is a lot of that where it's like you can kind of just make it up, man. As you don't have to cleave that closely to the rules, because the rules themselves are all just made up. So if you want a monster, instead of having to name it things like, oh, well, they're going to take a legendary action or something like that, it'd be like, no, yeah, this monster, instead of having, multi-attack, he has three different spots in initiative that he goes. He goes on 20, he goes on 15, and he goes on 10. And each one of those is a distinct turn. You can just do that. There's no reason you can't do that. You can break the rules once you know the rules. Like art or anything, right? You learn the rules, and once you learn the rules and understand the rules, you can disregard them, you can break them. As long as you are breaking them to have a specific purpose. Let's see, what is another thing they talked about? Oh, one of the things that they said that they wish had been in sort of like the DMG had been a world building checklist. The, like, this is your life section in Xanthar's Guide for PCs. They'd wish that there was something like that for world building, for like creating your own setting as a Dungeon Master. And I was like, oh, that's actually a pretty good idea to have like a checklist of, in some role tables, like 10 or 12 or whatever it is, to be like, hey, here's just like something to help you get started on very quickly on building your own little setting. I was like, yeah, that's a good one. That's true. I think we all have our takes on how bad we think the DMG for 5e, the 2014 one, is. And as I was talking with this friend, talking about specifically, like, it's hard to call a DMG good when it opens up the thing that's supposed to invite new dungeon masters in and try to get people excited about dungeon mastering, and it opens up with like, hey, you need to create a cosmology first for your home game. And you're like, oh, what like, that's the first thing I need to do? Yeah, I don't need to like figure out how to run encounters or build encounters or an adventure. Like, I gotta make a, not even just a world, I gotta make a cosmology first? Oof. Maybe I'm not ready to do this. So I think it does a disservice for newer people who are picking up that book, thinking it, strangely, would guide them in how to be a dungeon master. But yeah, having a checklist for the world building I think would be very useful. They also said they wish there was more work on classes. Like more meaty mechanics for specific to classes and help running or playing them. Similar to the feedback they had for like the monsters, where they want some tricks and some tactics help and stuff like that. And I think that that's true. I think as a new player, specifically the 2014 Player's Handbook, I think the 2024 book does a better job at that, where they're like, here's a quick way to make this character real quick and what they do and what you should try to focus on. But yeah, the 2014 one doesn't really do as good a job of that. Being like, oh, alright, so you want to play, do you want to, if you're a fighter, do you want to protect people? Then you want to be like a sword and board fighter, or take the interposing fighting style, or the shielding fighting style, whatever the one, there's like two of them now. One of them is significantly better than the other one. About how to like shield your friends and stay, that means that you want to stay next to your friends in combat, so you know, having some of those sort of things would be really helpful, I think, for new players. I think it would also balloon the book a whole bunch to have those sorts of sidebars on a lot of stuff. So I think, I'm not sure what the implementation that I would foresee. I don't know if it's its own soft cover book that's a little bit similar to The Monsters Know What They're Doing. There's a player version of it. I don't remember the name of that book. Something like that, that's a standalone thing on its own side that somebody could pick up, maybe. I know that they did one of those for like 4th edition too, where they had to like, hey, here's just some tips on how to be like a much more powerful gamer. It's basically like a power gamer guide or strategy tactics guide, which is interesting. And it made sense for 4th edition, which was a very, very heavy tactics-based game, where tactics were very important. And the last thing they had down here, that they they wish they'd learn the hard way, is that they're too nice to their players and their player characters. They're just too nice to them, and they wouldn't kill them off. It's like yeah, I guess so. I guess I think you get over that hurdle as Dungeon Master, Game Master, and be like, yeah. Especially with something like 5e, where killing a character accidentally is actually pretty difficult to do. You really kind of have to go out of your way to try to kill a character. Unless you're like one of my players, and you're like, I'm a first level character, I'm going to climb up into a tree, and then fall out of that tree 50 feet, and take a whole bunch of falling damage. Yeah, that'll do it, actually. Probably shouldn't have climbed a 50-foot tree. That's probably a bad idea. Especially not try to jump to another tree when you're 50 feet off the ground. And that's, yeah, not protecting your players from the consequences of their own actions. Warn them, but let them make mistakes. Because you don't want to get in a situation where a PC dies or has something really bad happen to them because the player didn't understand the situation that they were in. Like, you don't want it to be a miscommunication or lack of communication where ignorance is what ends up killing them, or because they're interpreting something wrong. And it'd be like, no, you understand the situation, and you are proceeding. Okay, and it's very clear what's going to happen if you fail, and you're still going to do it? Alright, okay. Roll them bones. Let's see what happens. So yeah, being too kill off in PC. He specifically they were specifically citing because it takes too long. It takes so long to make a PC, which I agree. I think the lethality of your game is inverse to how difficult it is to make another character. You see high lethality in really like OSR games, and that's fine because it takes like 5 minutes to make another character. And oftentimes before a game starts, you might have like 5 characters sheets already made. You'd be like, yeah, this guy will probably die at some point, and then I'll just grab the next sheet and we'll find him in the next dungeon chamber, chained up as a prisoner or whatever. So yeah, I think they are inverse. So I think in something like 2024 or 5e, especially with this now idea that this is more of a narrative role-playing game, where the emphasis is more on the story aspect, and we want characters that have the like this is your life section. They have like all this big backstory, and it's like, yeah, well, of course you don't want to like just kill that character off in a one and done and just be like, oh, hey, you didn't see the trap, you failed your dex save, and your character's dead. So yeah, I think that is just a hard thing to find the balance of, especially now. Because you need to feel like you can still challenge the players, and that there still is this risk of death, that your character could die at any point. And also, it's that because killing a PC, he gets eyes from players that like giving them the "I'm gonna kill you" eyes. I laughed because I know exactly which player they're talking about. It was like, oh yeah, I know that. I've seen that look already in our campaign. Yeah, no worries. And my advice to them was to lean into it. So instead when you feel the pressure of that player like pushing against you, you instead push back and be like, oh no, is your precious character in danger? Are they suffering the consequences of their own actions? Oh no. I don't know. I guess it depends on how well you roll the dice, because they could die. Instead of being like, oh, well then, instead of pulling punches or something like that, like, it's a tough situation. I hope they live. I hope they make it through. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I want to talk to today. We're going to figure out what happens next time. I'm going to need to keep working on this little dungeon I'm putting together for my crew of knuckleheads who are about to go find out that the rumors of gold in them there hills isn't exactly what they thought it was going to be. And it's not going to be what Japheth, our NPC, who gave him the quest, thinks it's going to be either. That's it. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. It's always fun. And I'll see you guys next time. Alright? Bye-bye.